Beneath the skin of the earth, carved by wind, water, time, and silence, lie landscapes so surreal they seem born of dreams rather than geology. Towering limestone spires rising from misty jungles, hidden monasteries perched atop cloud-wrapped peaks, deserts where mountains sing and shimmer like mirages. These are the unreal places of our planet, where nature bends the rules and the land tells stories older than history. In this journey, we venture deep into the hidden and holy mountains of China and beyond, far from the crowds and well-trodden trails, to explore remote wonders that defy expectation and ignite awe. From crater lake volcanoes in the far north to rainforest-shrouded cliffs in the subtropical south, each mountain holds a secret of ancient civilizations, spiritual awakenings, geological marvels, and the quiet persistence of life clinging to stone. These are not just places to see, they are places to feel, to question, to remember. Let the path begin. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video. High in the far northeastern reaches of China, where the sky seems to dip toward the land in the quiet dignity of an ancient realm, rises Mount Changbai, known in Korea as Mount Pictou. This otherworldly volcano, perched on the border between China's Jilin province and North Korea, is unlike any other mountain in Asia. Its snow-covered ridges and high-altitude forests cradle one of the most sacred and visually surreal lakes on the planet, Tianzhu, or Heavenly Lake. Formed within the massive caldera of a long-dormant volcano, this crater lake is more than just a geographical marvel. It is a wellspring of myth, a symbol of political significance, and a crown jewel in the hidden wilderness of northeastern China. Mount Changbai, which translates to Forever White Mountain, lives up to its name with dramatic alpine conditions that often blanket its summit in snow well into the late spring. The mountain is the highest peak in northeastern China, reaching an elevation of about 2,744 meters, 9,003 feet. It is part of a stratovolcano complex that has erupted multiple times over the millennia, the most significant of which occurred in 946 AD, an eruption so colossal that it is ranked among the most powerful volcanic explosions in the last 2,000 years. Ash from that eruption was found as far away as Japan and the Central Korean peninsula. The event dramatically altered the topography of the mountain, collapsing its peak into the broad, bowl-shaped caldera we see today, now filled by the deep cobalt waters of Lake Tianzhu. Heavenly Lake itself is a near-perfect oval, with a deep blue surface that mirrors the sky and clouds in such vivid detail that standing on its edge can make the viewer feel as if they're suspended in the air. Measuring about 3.5 kilometers in diameter and with depths plunging to over 370 meters, it is one of the deepest crater lakes in the world. The water is icy cold year-round, often frozen solid during the long winters, when the entire landscape is transformed into a white wasteland of wind-blown snow and ice. In the summer, the lake shimmers with ethereal calm, surrounded by craggy cliffs that descend into its depths like broken walls from a celestial citadel. Tianzhu has been venerated for centuries. To the Korean people, particularly in North Korea, Mount Pictou holds enormous symbolic and spiritual importance. It is considered the mythical birthplace of the Korean people, with stories claiming that Dan-gun, the legendary founder of the First Korean Kingdom, was born here. The mountain has been embedded in political narratives as well, particularly by North Korean regimes, which have linked their revolutionary heritage to the sacred mountain. On the Chinese side, the mountain has been a place of imperial pilgrimage, particularly during the Qing dynasty, when emperors would dispatch officials to survey and pay respects to this distant but hallowed frontier. The biodiversity of Mount Changbai is no less extraordinary than its geology and cultural lore. The slopes host a rare combination of ecosystems: boreal forests of spruce and fir trees, alpine meadows covered in wildflowers, and lower elevation broadleaf forests rich in medicinal plants. The area is home to over 2,000 species of plants and nearly 200 species of vertebrate animals. These include the elusive Siberian tiger, a moor leopard, and sika deer, along with various bears, wolves, and smaller mammals. The changing elevation results in distinct ecological bands, making the mountain a vertical microcosm of northeastern Asia's wilderness. One of the least expected wonders of Mount Changbai is the presence of over a dozen hot springs scattered around the volcanic terrain. These springs bubble up even in the coldest winters, their steaming waters hinting at the geothermal forces still simmering beneath the caldera. Some of the springs are scalding, boiling up with enough force to be heard from a distance, while others are more placid, forming tranquil pools surrounded by colorful mineral deposits. Tourism to Mount Changbai is increasing, though it remains relatively underexplored compared to China's more famous natural sites. The Chinese government has developed a number of infrastructure projects, including roads and cableways, to support growing numbers of visitors. Yet access is still seasonally limited, and the most stunning parts of the mountain, particularly the north slope leading to the best views of Tianzhu, are often only reachable during the warmer months. In winter, the area becomes a hauntingly beautiful frozen expanse, suitable only for the hardiest of adventurers or spiritual pilgrims drawn by the mountain's quiet majesty. Adding to the sense of mystery are persistent local legends about a monster said to dwell in the depths of Lake Tianzhu. Described by some witnesses as a massive aquatic beast with a body like a buffalo and the face of a dragon, sightings have been reported intermittently over the last century. While no scientific evidence supports the existence of such a creature, the stories add an air of the fantastical to a place already rich in myth and geological wonder. As both a geological marvel and a spiritual beacon, Mount Changbai stands as one of the most surreal and emotionally resonant places on Earth. It is not merely a mountain, it is a portal, a place where earth, sky, myth, and memory converge into a form that transcends physical geography. From the stark ridgelines to the eerie stillness of its azure lake, every inch of Changbai feels touched by something ancient and unknowable, as if the mountain itself remembers a time before humans ever walked its slopes. On the far western frontier of Yunnan province, where the land ripples upward into the great roof of the world, lies the legendary Jade Dragon Snow Mountain, or Yulong Shuoshan, a name that evokes mysticism, elegance, and elemental power. While the eastern face of the mountain draws tourists with cable cars and well-developed viewing platforms, it is the west ridge of Yulong that holds a more enigmatic, raw beauty, untamed and largely unseen by the average traveler. This lesser-known side of the mountain, obscured from casual view, is where Yulong reveals its wild soul, sculpted by glacier, brushed by alpine winds, and rarely touched by modern interference. Towering at 5,596 meters, 18,360 feet, Yulong is often hailed as the southernmost glaciated mountain in the northern hemisphere, standing like a solitary dragon frozen in motion above the lush valleys of Lijiang. From its summit to the river valleys below, it spans a dramatic range of ecosystems, from subtropical forests to alpine meadows, and ultimately, to the unforgiving snowscapes of its higher ridges. The west ridge of Yulong is remote and far more treacherous to access than the popular east side. There are no cable cars, no curated paths or kiosks, just the sharp chill of high-altitude winds, the silence of snowfields, and the occasional sound of falling ice as ancient glaciers shift imperceptibly in their frozen flow. What makes this side of Yulong so remarkable is its sense of untouched grandeur. The rock faces here are jagged and vertical, with glacial tongues spilling over cliff-like corrugations, casting eerie creaks and groans into the valley below. The snowfields often appear blue under the right light, a dense, ancient blue that only compacted glacier ice can reflect. In contrast to the well-photographed east, which gleams with the curated elegance of tourism, the west ridge wears the weathered scars of time. It's a sculptural masterpiece of uplifted marble and granite, twisted by tectonic violence and carved by millennia of wind and ice. This side of the mountain also offers rare perspectives of Yulong's true scale and isolation. Few realize that Yulong is not merely a solitary peak but a serrated massif made up of 13 distinct peaks, often cloaked in cloud. On clear days, standing on the west ridge affords an uninterrupted view of the Harbor Snow Mountain across the deep gorge of the Yangtze River, as well as the surrounding highlands of the Hengduan Mountains, a maze of geological folds that make up one of the most biodiverse temperate regions on Earth. The cultural dimension of Yulong is inseparable from its natural one. This mountain is sacred to the Naxi people, an ethnic minority with deep roots in this region. They believe Yulong to be the embodiment of a protective war god named Sanjuo, a deity who rides a white horse across the heavens. Each spring, Naxi communities hold ceremonial offerings to appease and honor the spirit of the mountain, especially when snowmelt and glacial runoff feed the rivers that give life to their terraced farms and forest groves. The West Ridge, seldom reached even by these local mountain people, is held in quiet reverence, not just as a physical challenge, but as a place alive with spirits, a realm where human presence feels like an intrusion. Ecologically, the western slopes of Yulong are immensely rich, owing to Yunnan's status as a global biodiversity hotspot. From the rhododendron thickets and pine oak forests below to the alpine cushion plants and mosses that survive near the snowline, the vertical biodiversity gradient is dramatic and complex. Endangered species such as the Yunnan golden monkey, the red panda, and even snow leopards are believed to roam these high, shadowy slopes, though sightings are vanishingly rare. High-altitude birds such as the blood pheasant and Himalayan monal flash brilliant colors against the muted grays of stone and snow. For alpinists and explorers, the West Ridge presents a serious challenge. The approach often begins from remote valleys where trails are indistinct and the terrain unstable. Access requires days of trekking through unpredictable weather, across knife-edge ridgelines, glacial moraine fields, and treacherous scree slopes. But those who make it are rewarded with some of the most breathtaking and surreal alpine vistas in East Asia, vistas that few human eyes have witnessed. The summit itself is notoriously difficult to reach and was only successfully climbed in 1987 by a Chinese expedition team, marking Yulong as one of China's last great and climbed peaks well into the modern age. The spiritual silence of the West Ridge is not empty, it is full of presence. The slow swirl of cloud against rock, the glint of sun off glacial crystals, the thin hiss of high-altitude air slipping over stone, all conspire to create an atmosphere that feels almost ceremonial. It's a place where time stretches thin and space becomes sacred. The raw energy of Earth's slow upheaval is visible in every cliff face and snow cornice, and the absence of human structures or noise allows nature's full voice to speak. Yet, even this sacred remoteness faces the pressures of a warming world. Climate change is steadily eroding Yulong's glacier, especially on the less shaded western face. Once perennial ice is now retreating seasonally. While this may seem abstract from afar, it has immediate consequences for the local climate, biodiversity, and water availability in nearby communities. It is a tragic irony that the least visited part of Yulong may be the most vulnerable, suffering changes largely unseen by those not willing to make the difficult pilgrimage. Still, the West Ridge of Mount Yulong remains a defiant fragment of ancient Earth, a defile carved by ice and belief, wind and myth. It is one of those rare places where the raw mechanics of geology become sublime, where isolation breeds intimacy, and where the silence is not emptiness but communion. In this forgotten fold of Yunnan's highlands, the snow dragon sleeps, dreamlike and luminous, in the arms of the sky. Tucked deep within the forested folds of western Fujian province lies Mount Tining, a landscape so surreal, so exquisitely sculpted by nature, that it appears less like a natural formation and more like a painted backdrop from some mythical epic. This isn't a jagged, snow-capped peak or a sky-piercing alpine summit. Rather, Mount Tining is part of the larger Tining Danxia region, a geological masterpiece shaped not by violence, but by time, wind, and water into a world of impossibly smooth vermilion cliffs, towering rock columns, ancient temple caves, and river-carved gorges. It is a landscape as meditative as it is majestic. The term Danxia refers to a unique type of red sandstone landform found only in China, characterized by steep escarpments, isolated towers, narrow gorges, and deeply weathered valleys. These landforms were created over the course of millions of years through a combination of tectonic uplift and gradual erosion. Unlike karst landscapes, which are formed from limestone and tend to feature rugged pinnacles and sinkholes, Danxia formations have a gentler, more fluid aesthetic. Their smooth, rounded surfaces and vertical cliffs give them the appearance of ancient, melted fortresses. Mount Tining represents one of the purest and most visually captivating examples of this rare geography. Designated as part of the UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site China Danxia in 2010, Mount Tining spans over 200 square kilometers and houses an astonishing array of features. Colossal red cliffs rising like petrified waves from the forest floor, vertical stone walls that glow golden at sunset, slot canyons barely wide enough for a person to pass through, and natural stone bridges that stretch between massive formations like veins across the sky. Walking through the region feels like moving inside a dream, one where the earth has been softened, polished, and painted in warm hues. Among the most famous features is Daqing Lake, an immense, winding body of water nestled in the valleys between the cliffs. Formed by a man-made dam but perfectly blending into the natural scenery, the lake winds through narrow gorges, past vertical rock walls, and into lush green bays. Taking a boat through Daqing Lake is like drifting through a temple of stone, the silence broken only by birdsong, the occasional splash of a fish, or the haunting echo of water lapping against rock. As the boat slips through slender passages flanked by 100-meter cliffs, the sheer verticality and texture of the Danxia rocks become overwhelmingly surreal, as if nature itself is leading a silent procession. But what elevates Mount Tining beyond mere geological curiosity is the deep historical and spiritual significance embedded in the cliffs. Hidden in alcoves, caves, and even impossibly steep overhangs are ancient Buddhist temples and hermit retreats. These aren't grand monasteries teeming with pilgrims. They are quiet, often forgotten sanctuaries, carved painstakingly into the stone by reclusive monks and spiritual seekers hundreds of years ago. These temple caves were used for meditation, refuge, and worship, forming a sacred union between human spirit and the landscape's immense stillness. One such site is the Shangqing Temple, which is believed to be over 1,000 years old. Perched precariously in the cliffs, it is only accessible by a winding path that clings to the rock face. This journey, part hike, part pilgrimage, takes visitors through shaded forests, across narrow stone ridges, and eventually up steep stairs carved into the mountain itself. Upon reaching the temple, visitors are met not only with the intricate wooden carvings of the temple's architecture but with sweeping, godlike views over the valleys of Danxia landforms, a visual sermon offered by the mountain itself. Then there are the Zixia and Yuanyang rock formations, massive vertical slabs of red stone that stand like titanic bookends to the surrounding forests and rivers. Their names, which mean purple glow and Mandarin duck, respectively, reflect the poetic relationship the Chinese have historically held with these landscapes. Artists, poets, and scholars of the Tang and Song dynasties would travel here to seek inspiration. Even today, calligraphy inscriptions more than 600 years old can be found etched into some of the more accessible cliff faces, faded by wind and rain, but still whispering the dreams of long-dead scholars. The flora and fauna of the region add yet another layer of wonder. Tining is blanketed in dense subtropical forests, teeming with biodiversity. The slopes are dotted with bamboo groves, ancient camphor trees, and countless species of mosses and ferns. In spring, wildflowers burst forth along cliff edges and trails, softening the raw red stone with bursts of color. The animal life is equally rich, with civets, macaques, pangolins, and over 150 species of birds calling this ecosystem home. The low human footprint in the more secluded valleys has allowed many rare and endangered species to survive here in a quiet ecological haven. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of Mount Tining is how accessible and immersive it feels despite its epic scale. Visitors can hike, boat, and even climb through these formations, experiencing the slow grandeur of the Danxia world at human speed. Some trails take you over ridge tops that afford eagle-eye views of the stone landscape rolling into infinity. Others lead down into canyons and along the shores of secret lakes, where sunlight filters through trees and reflects off stone like flickering firelight. The atmosphere shifts constantly, misty and mysterious in the morning, golden and ethereal in the evening. Unlike many mountain destinations that demand physical endurance or technical skill, Mount Tining opens its beauty to all who seek it, while still retaining an air of secrecy and sanctity. It is one of those rare places that manages to be both deeply spiritual and sensually overwhelming, a landscape that touches the aesthetic, historical, and metaphysical layers of the human experience. Mount Tining doesn't thunder with avalanches or pierce the sky like the Himalayas. Instead, it whispers, coaxes, and reveals. It's a symphony of curves, reflections, and shadows. A living fresco. A temple carved not by chisels, but by rain, wind, silence, and reverence. Here, time doesn't pass, it seeps into the rock, flowing as quietly and enduringly as the rivers below. Shrouded in a perpetual haze of drifting clouds and birdsong-filtered forest mist, Mount Changbai in eastern China's Zhejiang province is a mountain less known for its elevation and more for its soul. Rising gently from the green quilt of rice paddies and tea terraces, Changbai may not seem imposing at first glance. But as one ascends its wooded ridges, where pale light slants through centuries-old pines and the air hangs heavy with the fragrance of moss and incense, it becomes clear that this is no ordinary mountain. This is a sacred realm, the birthplace of the Changbai school of Mahayana Buddhism, a place where philosophy, meditation, and nature have intertwined for over a millennium. Mount Changbai, whose name means heavenly terrace, rises to a modest 1,138 meters, 3,734 feet, but within those slopes lies one of the most spiritually significant landscapes in all of East Asia. Unlike sheer Himalayan walls or volcanic craters, Changtai's beauty lies in its softness, its flowing ridgelines, its mist-veiled grottos, its jade-green waterfalls and trickling brooks. This environment inspired not just awe, but deep metaphysical contemplation. The mountain itself, with its changing moods of fog, sunlight, and shadow, seemed to breathe, a living metaphor for the Buddhist teachings that were born here. It was in the 6th century CE that the monk Zai, regarded as the founding patriarch of the Tiantai school, came to this mountain and began formulating one of the most profound and intricate systems of Buddhist philosophy in Chinese history. Drawing on Indian texts like the Lotus Sutra, Zai integrated meditation, doctrinal study, and daily practice into a comprehensive path toward enlightenment. What made Tiantai Buddhism revolutionary was its synthesis. It did not reject the world, but sought to perceive its true nature. Mount Changbai, in all its ephemeral beauty, was the perfect mirror for this insight. A world of illusion, yes, but also of profound interconnection and transcendent presence. Zai founded his retreat on Changbai slopes, where he meditated and taught under pine boughs and by flowing springs. Eventually, his teachings led to the construction of Daqing Temple, a spiritual epicenter that still stands today, nestled beneath towering trees and ancient rock faces. First built in 598 CE during the Sui dynasty, the temple is one of China's oldest surviving Buddhist sites and remains an active monastic complex. Its wooden eaves curl like calligraphy into the mist, while golden-robed monks chant beneath lantern-lit corridors, their voices rising and falling like the mountain's breath. Daqing Temple is not grand in size compared to the imperial temples of Beijing or the rock-hewn grottos of Dunhuang, but its power lies in its stillness. Entering its stone courtyards, one hears the creak of wood, the rustle of wind through bamboo, and the distant trickle of the mountain's many springs. This serenity is no accident. It is the embodiment of the Tiantai doctrine, which saw no difference between study and silence, between the sutra and the sound of rain on leaves. Each element of the landscape was a verse in a cosmic scripture, waiting to be read by the awakened mind. Beyond the temple, Mount Changbai unfolds as a labyrinth of sacred sites and natural marvels, many of them tucked into folds of forest or clinging to cliffside paths. The Shuliang waterfall, for example, is more than a scenic cascade. It is a legendary spot where Zai is said to have meditated beneath the roaring flow, contemplating the endless rhythm of form and emptiness. Its name, Stone Beam, comes from a natural rock bridge that crosses above the falls, a precarious yet poetic symbol of balance, arching between permanence and impermanence. Then there's the Huading Peak, the highest point of the mountain, where a sweeping panorama of misty valleys and distant ridgelines unfolds like an ink painting come to life. Sunrise here is a spiritual event, the golden disk of the sun emerging through layers of fog, slowly warming the forest canopy below. On clear days, one can see the eastern seaboard shimmer in the distance, but more often the view is a shifting ocean of white and silver mist, constantly morphing like the mind in meditation. In addition to its central role in Chinese Buddhism, Mount Changbai has deeply influenced Korean and Japanese Buddhist traditions. Changbai Buddhism was carried to Japan in the early 9th century by the monk Saichi, who studied at Daqing Temple and later founded the Tendai school in Japan. As a result, Mount Changbai became not only a Chinese spiritual hub but a cradle of Pan-Asian religious development, a kind of body tree under which entire civilizations found new branches of enlightenment. But the mountain's spiritual magnetism goes beyond the monasteries and historical lineages. Many visitors, secular and devout alike, report a visceral sense of peace when walking Changtai's moss-carpeted trails, where ancient cedars arch overhead like living colonnades and dragonflies hum over mountain ponds. The air here seems heavier, not with pollution or humidity, but with stillness, a profound quiet that slows the heart and invites introspection. This is not coincidental. For centuries, the landscape was consciously shaped by spiritual ecology, groves planted by monks, paths aligned to energy flows, shrines placed where geomantic principles guided. Mount Changbai is also a cultural treasure chest. In nearby villages, artisans continue ancient traditions: ink brush painting, woodblock printing, calligraphy, and Buddhist sculpture. These crafts aren't tourist relics, they are the living expressions of a worldview shaped by the mountain's rhythm. Many of the region's paintings and poems depict the mountain not as a backdrop, but as a teacher, a wise, silent being whose every ridge and cloud carries the weight of centuries. Even the weather here seems imbued with character. The frequent fog rolls in not in thick walls, but in gentle waves, wrapping around branches and stone steps, cloaking temple bells in silence. Rain falls with a contemplative softness, and even storms feel like cleansing rites rather than violent disruptions. It's no wonder that Mount Changbai has often been described as a living sutra, a place where the landscape itself speaks the Dharma. Despite increasing popularity, Much of Mount Changbai retains its uncommercialized purity. While modern roads and modest guest houses have been introduced, large-scale development has been carefully avoided. The area remains under strong protection, both as a UNESCO-recognized heritage site and as a revered spiritual zone. The monks here do not entertain tourists. They maintain practice, chant the sutras, care for the forests, and tend to the ancient buildings not as artifacts, but as living homes of the Dharma. In a world of flashing screens and constant movement, Mount Changbai stands utterly apart, a sanctuary where the pace of life slows to match the unfolding of a lotus. It is a place not for thrill seekers, but for seekers of a different kind, those looking for wisdom not shouted, but whispered by wind, stone, and silence. Hidden in the untamed wilds of northwestern Yunnan, where the edges of the Himalayas begin to break into ridgelines that slice the sky, stands Mount Laojun, a surreal and rugged expanse that bears no resemblance to its more famous namesake in Henan. This version of Laojun is no gentle slope topped with temples. It is a realm of fractured peaks, kaleidoscopic rock layers, cloud-tossed valleys, and epic geological drama. It is one of China's most underrated natural wonders, a place where stone seems to burn with color, and every cliff and canyon tells a story written over hundreds of millions of years. Located in the Three Parallel Rivers region of Yunnan, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most biologically and geologically diverse areas on Earth, Mount Laojun is part of a vast and relatively unexplored mountain complex that stretches across the boundaries of Lijiang and Daqing Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. Its highest peaks soar to elevations of over 4,200 meters, 13,780 feet, placing it firmly within the highlands that fringe the Tibetan Plateau. Yet it remains largely unknown to international travelers, overshadowed by more popular destinations like Jade Dragon Snow Mountain or Meili Snow Mountain. This obscurity, however, has preserved its otherworldly beauty. What immediately distinguishes Mount Laojun from other ranges is its breathtakingly colorful geology. Here, the Earth has not settled into uniformity, it has erupted into wild expression. Bands of red, yellow, orange, green, and purple stone wrap around peaks like geological brushstrokes, the result of ancient seabeds uplifted and weathered over eons. In some areas, the landscape resembles a massive, collapsed cathedral, jagged spires, broken ridgelines, and sheer cliffs that rise from forested floors with near-vertical defiance. This riot of color and texture is so striking that some locals call it the stone forest of the gods. The area's most famous natural attraction is the 1,000 Turtle Mountain, Qiangui Shan, a surreal slope composed of countless rounded, boulder-like formations that resemble the shells of giant turtles stacked across the land. From above, it appears almost artificial, as if some celestial sculptor had meticulously arranged these stones in hypnotic, patterned waves. These rock domes are made of granite and sandstone shaped by eons of frost wedging and wind erosion. In the shifting light of sunrise and sunset, they glow with an iridescence that seems to move beneath the surface, purple turning to gold, red to umber, orange to silvered pink. But Mount Laojun's wonders aren't limited to the rocks themselves. The vegetation is just as extraordinary. Because the mountain sits at the intersection of multiple climate zones, from the dry valleys of the Lancang River to the alpine meadows that brush the clouds, it supports an astonishing array of flora and fauna. Rhododendrons grow in wild abundance, painting the hillsides with red, pink, and white blooms in spring. Towering fir and spruce forests blanket the mid-elevations, while the higher slopes are crowned with grasslands and scattered stands of dwarf pine and juniper. The mountain is also home to rare wildlife, some of it found nowhere else on Earth. The Yunnan snub-nosed monkey, one of the world's most endangered primates, lives in these high-altitude forests, leaping between icy branches in family groups and howling hauntingly through the valleys. Leopards, musk deer, Himalayan black bears, and over 160 species of birds make this region their home, living in relative peace thanks to the remoteness and minimal human development in the area. Conservationists regard Mount Laojun as a hidden ark of biodiversity, a sanctuary for life forms long threatened elsewhere. Human presence here is sparse and mostly spiritual. Scattered throughout the mountains are small Tibetan and Nashi villages, whose inhabitants have coexisted with this wild terrain for generations. Many practice a blend of Tibetan Buddhism and indigenous animism, believing that the peaks are inhabited by mountain spirits, protective deities known as Yul Ha who must be respected through seasonal offerings and ritual abstinence. Pilgrimage routes wind through the valleys and up along the ridgelines, and it's not uncommon to find mani stones, prayer flags, or simple stone cairns left as spiritual offerings to the land. Unlike many Chinese mountains where tourism infrastructure dominates the experience, Mount Laojuan's facilities remain minimal. There are a few modest hiking trails, suspension bridges, and basic shelters, but most of the region is still wild and undeveloped. This means that exploration requires genuine effort, multi-day treks, careful navigation, and a willingness to sleep under the stars or in humble guesthouses in local villages. But for those who undertake the journey, the rewards are unlike anywhere else in the world. The viewpoints are staggering: mist rising from deep green valleys, cliffs plunging into shadowy abysses, colored stone walls glowing in morning sun. At night, the sky explodes with stars, unobstructed by light pollution, as cold mountain winds whisper through the passes. It's the kind of place where you feel the earth's age in your bones, where each footstep feels ancient, and each vista seems to pull you into a deeper state of awe. Geologically, the area also tells a story of continental collision. These mountains were once seafloors, then thrust upwards when the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates slammed into each other over 50 million years ago. Fossils of ancient sea creatures have been discovered high in the rock layers, preserved in stone that now stands thousands of meters above sea level. The colored bands of Laojuan's peaks are records of this upheaval, an ancient timeline laid bare for those who know how to read the rocks. Even its mythology reflects its grandeur. One legend holds that the Taoist immortal Laozi once retreated here, hence the name Laojun or Old Lord. According to stories passed down in local oral traditions, the sage meditated among these peaks and transformed the mountain itself into a living mandala, a geometric landscape of sacred balance, color, and spirit. While historians consider this tale symbolic, the spiritual resonance it holds for locals is palpable. Many believe that the strange shapes and hues of the rock formations are physical manifestations of Laozi's thoughts, frozen into matter. In every sense, Mount Laojun in Yunnan is a land of revelation, a geological wonderland, a biodiversity vault, a spiritual temple, and a frontier of mystery. It's a place where the earth speaks through stone and color, through silence and wind, through the rhythm of clouds spilling over broken ridgelines. Few who visit return unchanged. And perhaps what makes it so unreal, so otherworldly, is precisely its lack of intrusion. It is not manicured or staged. It does not perform for its visitors. It simply is, wild, radiant, unyielding, and in its rugged solitude, it reminds us what the earth looked like before names and borders, before maps and fences. A place not meant to be tamed, but remembered, rising like a forgotten citadel from the borderlands between Han China and the Tibetan Plateau. Mount Jinping in Sichuan province is a place few have heard of and even fewer have truly explored. It is one of the most remote and rugged mountain landscapes in all of China, sitting deep within the vast Hengduan mountain system. A chaotic, skyscraping tapestry of granite spires, plunging river valleys, glacial lakes, and cloud-wrapped ridgelines that stretches like a jagged spine through the upper reaches of western Sichuan. Here, nature is not passive or ornamental. It is primeval, unforgiving, and sacred. Mount Jinping itself is often obscured in the shadows of better-known peaks like Mount Gongar or the Meili Snow Mountains, but this obscurity only adds to its mystique. Towering to nearly 5,600 meters, 18,370 feet, Jinping is one of the highest non-Himalayan peaks in the world that remains almost completely undocumented in popular travel literature. Much of the massif remains unmapped in detail, unexplored by major expeditions, and untouched by modern infrastructure. This is a mountain not for tourists but for those willing to lose themselves in the folds of a wild, living landscape. Located within Yajiang County, at the crossroads of Tibetan cultural influence and Han Chinese governance, Mount Jinping is surrounded by valleys dotted with Tibetan-style villages, where prayer flags flutter in alpine winds and the walls of whitewashed houses are painted with auspicious symbols in red and ochre. These settlements are part of the Kham region of Tibet, known for its fiercely independent spirit, distinctive language dialects, and rich artistic and religious traditions. Here, the people have lived for centuries in balance with the rhythms of the mountains, planting barley and herding yaks in the summer, retreating indoors during the snowbound months, and engaging in annual festivals that bind the community to the sacred landscape around them. From a geological standpoint, Mount Jinping is part of the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau uplift, shaped by millions of years of tectonic thrusting and faulting. Unlike symmetrical volcanic cones or rounded Dansha hills, Jinping's profile is angular, fractured, and volatile, a monument of stone uplifted by violent pressure, then carved by time into a matrix of saw-toothed ridges, hanging glacier, and deep, forested valleys. Landslides, avalanches, and rockfalls are common in this terrain, especially during the heavy summer monsoon, when entire slopes can shift with the weight of waterlogged earth and melting snow. One of the most breathtaking and surreal features in the region is the Jinping Bend of the Yalong River, a massive horseshoe turn carved by the river through layers of bedrock at the foot of the mountain. The river, a powerful tributary of the Yangtze, cuts through some of the deepest gorges in China, with walls towering thousands of meters above its whitewater rapids. The terrain here is so extreme that the world's deepest hydropower tunnel, the Jinping Hydropower Station, had to be drilled through the mountain rather than dam the river above. This tunnel, more than 17 kilometers long and buried under 2,500 meters of rock, is one of the deepest man-made underground passages on the planet. Its construction revealed previously unknown layers of Earth's crust, including crystalline rocks never before studied, making the mountain not only a geographic marvel but a scientific treasure trove. Yet, despite this grandiose scale, Mount Jinping remains astonishingly quiet. The few trails that exist are typically used by local herders or seasonal pilgrims rather than hikers. The routes are often barely distinguishable from animal paths, weaving through high meadows, across scree fields, and over wind-blasted ridgelines. To walk here is to enter an older world, one where the sky feels closer, time slows, and each step seems to echo in the cold silence. The air thins quickly, and even seasoned trekkers feel the altitude's press on their lungs, especially in the glacier-fed valleys where waterfalls crash down from invisible peaks, their origins lost in the clouds. Despite the harshness of the environment, there is an ethereal beauty to everything. In summer, the alpine grasslands bloom with edelweiss, blue poppies, and wild primulas, spreading like carpets of color across the meadows beneath the cliffs. Snow leopards are rumored to roam these slopes, though sightings are extremely rare and often passed down as whispered folklore among the villages. More common are marmots, Tibetan foxes, golden eagles, and herds of blue sheep, which scale the steepest crags with unsettling ease. The forested lower elevations are cloaked in fir, larch, and rhododendron, often tangled with lichen and shrouded in an almost perpetual mist. The spiritual fabric of the mountain is no less rich. In Tibetan Buddhism, certain peaks are regarded as Gang Rinpoche, living deities in mountain form, and while Mount Jinping is not widely recognized on the same level as Mount Kailash, local lore reveres it as a powerful guardian spirit. Small chortens, stone prayer mounds, are often seen on the passes, and it's customary for travelers to pause, offer a pinch of tsampa, barley flour, or hang a new prayer flag before continuing. These gestures, though simple, are part of a profound relationship between the people and the land, an understanding that this is not just scenery, but sacred space. Mount Jinping's remoteness has also made it a haven for ancient cultural practices. Local shamans and lay practitioners still perform sky burial rituals, and oral traditions passed down for generations tell of hidden valleys, Bayul, where enlightened beings are said to dwell beyond the physical realm. In many of these stories, the mountain itself becomes a character, a guide, a gatekeeper, or a test. Some legends speak of caves where time ceases to move, where travelers emerge thinking only hours have passed while years have slipped away outside. These tales, blending Buddhism, animism, and folklore, add to the mountain's otherworldly aura. In the modern world, Mount Jinping straddles a tension. On one hand, its mineral-rich geology and hydroelectric potential attract engineers and scientists. On the other, its inaccessibility and sacredness protect it from overexposure. There are no sprawling tourist complexes here, no cable cars or neon-lit resorts. There are only the scattered footprints of those who live in its shadow, and the quiet reverence of those who find their way to its flanks. In the end, Mount Jinping is more than a place, it is an experience of humility. It humbles with its size, with its beauty, with its silence. It reminds us that there are still places in the world where wilderness is not a product to be consumed, but a force to be felt. Where the earth speaks in wind and stone, and where the stories of a people are written not in books, but in the trails, shrines, and stars that mark the high ridges of the sky. In the vast, wind-scoured expanse of western Inner Mongolia, where the Gobi Desert blurs into high desert plateaus and silent stretches for hundreds of miles, rises one of Earth's most surreal and improbable wonders, Mount Badain-Jaran, or more accurately, the Badain-Jaran Desert, which holds within it some of the tallest stationary sand dunes on the planet. Here, mountains are not made of granite or basalt, but of wind-stacked sand, rising in golden, peach, and copper-hued waves up to 500 meters, 1,640 feet, high. These towering dunes, surrounded by mirror-like lakes and wind-polished stone outcrops, create a spectacle that is not only visually overwhelming but geologically astonishing. The Badain Jiran Desert, part of the larger Gobi Desert system, covers over 49,000 square kilometers, but it is unlike any other desert on Earth. Most deserts offer horizontal infinities, flat plains of dunes rolling gently into the distance. But here, the landscape explodes vertically, with slopes so steep and high that they rival some of the world's smaller mountain ranges. It is in this improbable environment that Mount Badain Jiran, the highest of these dunes, earns its place among Earth's most unreal natural features. Standing at a staggering 1,610 feet, around 490 meters, tall, Mount Badain Jiran is not a mountain in the conventional sense, but its scale and dominance over the surrounding desert landscape justify its title. Its slopes are so steep that climbing it feels like scaling a liquid mountain. Every step sinks, slides, and collapses backward, making the ascent exhausting and meditative. The silence is absolute, broken only by the wind and a strange, otherworldly phenomenon, the booming sands. Known in Chinese as Oudmakran, this deep, humming sound emerges from the dunes under just the right conditions, when dry grains of sand cascade down the face of the dune, creating a resonant, thunder-like echo that seems to come from deep within the earth. Scientists have yet to fully explain this eerie natural symphony, and to hear it echoing across a lifeless expanse of golden sand is to be transported out of time. Yet, the true magic of the Badain Jiran region lies not just in its height, but in its contradictions. Within the vastness of the desert are over 140 spring-fed lakes, their waters shimmering blue and green, nestled improbably between the colossal sand peaks. These are permanent lakes, sustained not by rainfall, which is virtually non-existent, but by underground water sources filtered through layers of porous stone from distant mountain ranges. The presence of these lakes amid such extreme aridity gives the landscape an otherworldly, almost dreamlike quality. You can stand atop a 400-meter dune and look down to see a perfect turquoise oval framed by gold and scarlet sands, with small patches of green reeds and occasional herds of camels grazing nearby. Some of these lakes have salt crusts, giving them a reflective sheen and rendering them iridescent in the sunlight. Others are freshwater and support small, almost ghost-like oases. These lakes carry evocative names like Lake Nwurtu and Lake Belutu, each with its own ecology and spiritual history. Local Mongolian herders believe many of the lakes to be sacred, inhabited by spirits or blessed with healing properties. Tiny temples and shrines can be found hidden in the reeds or perched on nearby outcroppings, where pilgrims leave offerings and light incense beneath sky-bleached prayer flags. The human presence in this vast solitude is minimal but profound. Ethnic Mongol communities, descendants of nomadic herders, still traverse the region with herds of camels and goats, living in zhes, yurts, and maintaining traditions that stretch back to the time of Genghis Khan. Many of these communities hold oral histories that describe the desert's features as living entities, the dunes as sleeping giants, the lakes as the eyes of the gods, the wind as a messenger between worlds. These stories aren't metaphors, they are navigational and spiritual tools, deeply woven into how people survive and make sense of a landscape that seems to shift and breathe with its own will. And yet, the climate of Badain Jiran is not uniformly dry. In winter, snow sometimes dusts the crests of the tallest dunes, turning them into shimmering golden-white ridgelines. In summer, violent storms can emerge with almost no warning, sweeping across the desert with walls of sand and sudden downpours that briefly reawaken dormant seeds. These rare rains cause sudden, short-lived blooms of desert flowers and mosses that cloak the bases of the dunes in soft green, a miracle of life in a place seemingly defined by its absence. The scientific interest in Badain Jiran is equally intense. The geomechanics of the dunes, why they remain so tall and stationary in a region defined by shifting winds, remain partially mysterious. Theories suggest that moisture trapped deep within the sand, compressed by centuries of heat and pressure, helps stabilize the base of the dunes, allowing the upper layers to build without collapsing. The sheer verticality of the dunes is rare even among hyperarid regions worldwide, rivaling formations found only in select parts of Namibia or Peru. Despite its grandeur, the Badain Jiran region remains remarkably under-touristed. A few intrepid travelers make the multi-day journey from places like Zhangye or Jinchang, often requiring 4x4 vehicles capable of crossing dune fields, or even multi-day camel treks with local guides. The infrastructure is minimal, basic guest houses, yurts, and a few small towns at the periphery, but this is part of the appeal. It is not a place for casual visits. It demands endurance, respect, and humility, rewarding only those who surrender to its rhythms. At night, the desert becomes a cathedral of silence and stars. The dunes cast long, moonlit shadows. The air is perfectly still. Under a sky undisturbed by light pollution, the Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, and shooting stars skim the atmosphere like ancient omens. There is no ambient noise, no cities, no echo of machines, only the crunch of dry sand, the breath of wind, and your own thoughts, suddenly loud and clear. In a world where much of the natural landscape has been subdued or repackaged for convenience, Mount Changbai and its neighboring dunes stand defiant and timeless. It is a place where scale becomes spiritual, where light reshapes the earth minute by minute, and where silence becomes a language in itself. To visit is not just to see, it is to feel the raw pulse of geological time, to walk through a living monument built by wind, heat, and deep earth water, and to encounter one of the most unreal yet profoundly real places on the planet. As the land rises steeply from the fertile Sichuan Basin into the crumpled folds of the eastern Tibetan Plateau, one mountain stands as both a physical and spiritual threshold, Mount Changbai. It is not the tallest peak in the region, nor the most famous. Yet its presence is monumental, a sentinel of stone that has, for centuries, marked the gateway to Tibet. Rising to 4,298 meters, 14,100 feet, Mount Changbai serves as the symbolic and topographical dividing line between China's Han heartlands and the wild, sacred highlands of Kham Tibetan territory. To cross it is to leave one world and enter another. Located just west of Kangding, a frontier town nestled between roaring rivers and lush valleys, Mount Changbai is often the first taste of true high altitude for those traveling westward. The approach from Kangding is already dramatic. Green mountains climb higher, the air grows thin and crisp, and switchback roads cling to sheer cliffs like veins etched into stone. But it is at the Changbai mountain pass, the highest point of this winding journey, that the transformation truly occurs. Here, travelers are greeted with fluttering lines of prayer flags, thousands of them, strung between poles, boulders, shrines, and signposts, flapping furiously in the highland wind. Red, blue, green, yellow, and white, each color representing a natural element, carrying mantras skyward in an unending chant of fabric and wind. This is no ordinary highway crossing. The Changbai Pass, which sits almost 3,000 meters higher than Kangding, is regarded as one of the most dramatic mountain roads in China. The drive itself is harrowing and beautiful, a relentless series of hairpin turns carved into steep mountainsides, often blanketed in clouds or mist. In winter, it's snow-covered and treacherous, with ice and avalanches occasionally closing the road. In summer, the slopes erupt with alpine wildflowers and emerald meadows where yaks graze beneath towering peaks. Along the way, waterfalls spill from cliffs, Buddhist stupas mark sacred spots, and locals pause to hang new flags or spin prayer wheels in passing. The mountain's Tibetan name, Changbai, reflects its place in regional lore as a site of spiritual significance and natural power. The Kham Tibetans who inhabit this region see mountains as living beings, powerful guardians of the land whose moods shift with the weather and whose presence must be honored. Changbai, in particular, is seen as a protector deity, its slopes believed to watch over travelers as they pass into the land of the gods. It is customary to stop at the summit, whether traveling by car, bus, bicycle, or foot, to offer a prayer, toss a handful of tsampa flour into the wind, or tie a new strand of flags to those already whispering across the sky. Despite the road that now runs across it, part of the famed Sichuan-Tibet Highway, one of the most dangerous and breathtaking roads in the world, much of Mount Changbai remains untamed and rarely visited by those who don't pause at the summit pass. Those who venture off the beaten path find a land of alpine lakes, jagged cliffs, glacial valleys, and endless ridgelines, often obscured in cloud or shrouded in snow. The higher you climb, the more surreal the scenery becomes. Valleys open up like storybooks, dotted with Tibetan stone houses, barley fields, and distant herds of yaks moving like shadows across the hillsides. One of the most compelling features of the greater Changbai region is its intensely varied microclimates. On the eastern slope, moist air from the Sichuan Basin supports dense coniferous forests, rich in moss, ferns, and rhododendrons. On the western slope, which descends toward the drier Tibetan plateau, The vegetation quickly gives way to grassy tundra, bare ridgelines, and fields of alpine stone. This sudden transition is startling, a clear line between ecosystems, cultures, and altitudes. The views from the Zhadwa Pass are breathtaking in clear weather. On a good day, one can see Gonga Mountain, Minyakonka, the tallest peak in Sichuan at over 7,500 meters, rising like a white pyramid above a sea of lesser peaks. The morning sun often casts golden light on the clouds below the pass, creating what locals call a sea of clouds, a visual phenomenon in which the valleys are completely hidden beneath a billowing white blanket, while the peaks float like islands above. There are also hidden monasteries in the folds of the mountain, accessible only by narrow dirt trails or horseback routes. These monastic retreats, some dating back centuries, are inhabited by small communities of monks or hermits who maintain Buddhist practice amidst the silence and austerity of the highlands. One such monastery, Tagong Monastery, lies not far from Zhadwa and is part of the larger spiritual network nourished by the mountain's presence. Pilgrims often walk between these sites, spending days traversing sacred terrain, stopping at meditation caves or holy springs believed to cleanse the soul. For the adventure inclined, Zhadwa offers more than just a pass to cross. It is a gateway to endless exploration. Trekking routes lead into the remote valleys of Tagong grassland, where tents dot the landscape and horseback caravans move between settlements. Trails also connect to Legang and other small Tibetan towns, where colorful festivals, masked dances, and sky burials still punctuate the calendar. Every step beyond Zhadwa deepens one's immersion into Tibetan cultural lifeways, where life is marked by the rhythms of the land and the teachings of the Dharma. But even a brief stop at the Zhadwa summit has the power to change a traveler. There is something profound about standing there, wind ripping at your jacket, lungs laboring in the thin air, eyes squinting into a horizon stitched with mountains and sky. The silence is immense, broken only by the clack of prayer flags and the distant lowing of a yak. In that moment, you are no longer simply crossing a mountain. You are crossing a threshold of history, culture, and spirit. In many ways, Mount Zhadwa is not just a place, but an experience of transition. It marks the boundary between the known and the mysterious, the ordinary and the sacred. Every traveler who passes over it, whether they realize it or not, undergoes a subtle transformation. The heart opens, the mind slows, the sky feels closer, and the road, winding ever westward, begins to feel less like a journey and more like a pilgrimage. In the heart of Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region, where the landscape dissolves into fantasy-like formations of surreal verticality and emerald green waterways, lies a gem largely hidden from the broader gaze of global travelers, Mount Yaji. Part of the Yaji Mountain scenic area, this karst wonderland exists as a less commercialized, more intimate sibling to the globally famous karst peaks of Guilin and Yangshior. Yet in terms of beauty, drama, and ecological richness, it holds its own, offering a dreamlike immersion into one of Earth's most unreal and geologically ancient landscapes. Mount Yaji, sometimes called Yaji Hill due to the linguistic fluidity between mountain and hill in Chinese, is part of a sprawling karst system created by millions of years of limestone dissolution. This process, involving acidic rainfall slowly eating away at soluble rock, has sculpted the Earth here into sharp, narrow spires, steep domes, rugged cliffs, and hidden caves, all rising abruptly from a landscape of lush subtropical forest and glistening rivers. The result is a scene so vivid and cinematic that it seems less like a place on Earth and more like something imagined into being. Unlike many of the better-known karst mountains, Mount Yaji exists along a river corridor that snakes through the limestone like a painter's brushstroke. The waters here are startlingly clear and deeply green, colored by minerals and algae that reflect the surrounding vegetation and sky. Bamboo rafts glide gently across these waters, dwarfed by vertical cliffs that seem to defy physics, leaning inward as if peering curiously at the world below. In the early morning, a thin mist rises off the river, wrapping the base of the limestone pillars and giving the entire region a dreamlike appearance, as though the peaks were floating above clouds. The peaks of Yaji are not towering in terms of elevation, most rise between 200 and 600 meters, but their verticality is extreme. Their sides are sheer, their tops jagged or flat, often cloaked in vegetation that clings stubbornly to the rock, creating pockets of green that soften the stone's severity. Trees here grow in impossible places, along cliffs, inside crevices, and on exposed karst domes, sustained by rain and mist. Epiphytes, orchids, and ferns thrive in the humid air, draping the mountains in an almost jungle-like cloak. The blend of stone and life gives Mount Yaji the appearance of a world where earth and sky have fused. One of the unique features of Mount Yaji is the dense concentration of caves and sinkholes hidden within its stone body. These are not superficial caves, but vast, cathedral-like chambers that run deep into the karst system, some with underground rivers, others with vertical shafts that open to the surface, allowing beams of sunlight to pierce the darkness in ethereal columns. Some of these caves have been used for centuries as temples or shrines, where monks carved statues of Buddhas into the walls and villagers still leave offerings of incense and candles. Others remain completely wild, home to bats, cave shrimp, and species still being documented by biologists. Culturally, Mount Yaji and the surrounding karst region are deeply intertwined with the Zhuang ethnic people, the largest ethnic minority in China. Their traditional homes, often wooden stilt structures called Dairojialu, dot the riverbanks and valleys around the mountains. Their culture, language, and songs reflect a harmonious relationship with the land, particularly the rivers and limestone peaks that define their existence. In some local beliefs, the karst spires are seen as immortal beings turned to stone, forever watching over the fields and waters below. Folk songs echo between the peaks during festivals and weddings, a haunting, melodic call that rises and falls with the shape of the land. For those lucky enough to walk the narrow trails that wind around and between the limestone peaks, the silence is profound. The only sounds are the murmur of flowing water, the chirping of insects, and the occasional cry of a kingfisher darting through the trees. Some trails lead to hidden temples, small and weathered, built directly into the rock face. Others rise to natural stone balconies, viewpoints where the surrounding peaks seem to roll endlessly like waves frozen in time. It's easy to become disoriented in this labyrinth of vertical stone and green. The landmarks look deceptively similar, the scale warps with every new perspective, and time seems to melt into the haze. Ecologically, the region is a biodiversity hotspot. The unique microclimates created by the karst formations, with their varying elevations, shade, and water availability, have given rise to rare and endemic plant species, some of which exist only in the cracks of specific cliffs. The surrounding forests are home to civets, macaques, pangolins, and a stunning variety of birds, including the silver pheasant and the Chinese barbet, whose calls echo through the valleys. Insects, amphibians, and reptiles have also evolved to match this complex terrain, creating an intricate and often invisible web of life within the limestone jungle. For those interested in geology, Mount Yaji is a masterclass in karst development. From tower karst to cone karst, from dolins to natural bridges, the full spectrum of limestone formations can be studied here. Some cliffs feature karst notches, horizontal scars marking former water levels, while others have razor-sharp lapes, surface grooves etched by chemical weathering. Underground, speleothems, stalactites, stalagmites, columns, and flowstones decorate the cave interiors like frozen waterfalls. The karst system continues to evolve, shaped daily by the slow drip of acidic water, silently reshaping the stone across the millennia. But beyond science and culture, Mount Yaji is simply a place of awe. It invites reflection, demands attention, and humbles with its scale and silence. Unlike famous landmarks polished by tourism, Yaji remains raw, quiet, and alive, a breathing monument to the slow magic of water and time. It is a reminder that some of the Earth's most astonishing wonders aren't carved by volcanoes or plate tectonics, but by the patient persistence of rain on stone, drop by drop, century after century. In a single glance, you can see 5 or 6 peaks rising sharply, their silhouettes soft in the mist, while the river curls like a green ribbon between them. In that view is history, geology, spirit, and story, all told not in words, but in the shape of stone and the shimmer of light on water. Mount Yaji does not clamor for attention. It simply waits, timeless and unchanging, for those willing to listen. Hidden within the mist-veiled ranges of central Sichuan, where the mountains rise like guardians of the cloud and the forests teem with ancient secrets, lies one of China's most ethereal and ecologically significant natural wonders, Mount Huawu, also known as Huawushan. Though not as globally renowned as its towering cousins to the west, Mount Huawu possesses a quiet majesty all its own. It is a realm of dense primeval forests, ever-shifting cloud seas, mysterious plateaus, rare alpine wetlands, and an astonishing concentration of endangered species, including some found nowhere else on Earth. At its highest point, Mount Huawu ascends to 3,050 meters, 10,006 feet, above sea level, but it is not a jagged, spear-like peak. Instead, the summit is an expansive, flat-topped plateau, a unique formation among China's mountains that has given rise to a distinct high-elevation ecosystem. The summit's flatness is so pronounced that from above, the mountain resembles a colossal table draped in green velvet and rimmed with steep cliffs, a natural fortress of biodiversity suspended in cloud. The name Huawu translates to tile house, a reference to the mountain's flat, tiled appearance when viewed from afar. This unusual geography, combined with the moisture-laden winds that blow in from the Sichuan Basin, makes Mount Huawu a perfect stage for cloud seas, those breathtaking inversions where the valleys below vanish beneath a billowing white ocean, and only the highest ridges and trees rise above, like islands in a dream. At sunrise or sunset, when the clouds ignite with gold and crimson light, the entire mountain takes on a celestial quality. Monks, poets, and hermits have long come here to meditate, write, and vanish into the fog. The forests of Mount Huawu are among the oldest and most untouched in China. Largely spared from the clear-cutting that devastated other parts of Sichuan during the mid-20th century, these woods are dense, dark, and dripping with life. Ancient spruce, fir, and cypress trees tower above, their trunks wrapped in moss and lichen. Beneath them grow layers of bamboo, rhododendrons, ferns, and medicinal herbs, forming a complex, tiered forest that feels primordial, as though it has existed for millennia without interference. It is within these shadows that one of the mountain's most precious inhabitants makes its home, the Sichuan snub-nosed monkey, Rhinopithecus roxolana. Also known as the golden snub-nosed monkey, this rare and endangered primate is perhaps Huawu's most iconic symbol. With its blue face, golden fur, and striking eyes, it seems almost mythical, a creature conjured from folklore rather than biology. These monkeys live in large, matriarchal groups, communicating through a complex system of vocalizations, body postures, and facial expressions. They are highly intelligent, socially sophisticated, and sensitive to environmental change, which is why Mount Huawu's preserved habitat is so critical to their survival. But the snub-nosed monkey is not alone. Mount Huawu is a biodiversity stronghold, harboring over 3,000 species of plants and animals, many of them rare or endangered. Among them are clouded leopards, Chinese giant salamanders, black bears, red pandas, civets, and muntjac deer. The skies above are patrolled by eagles, hawks, and the elusive blood pheasant, whose iridescent feathers seem to reflect the shifting moods of the forest itself. Birdwatchers and biologists alike consider Huawu one of the richest avian habitats in all of China. Equally astonishing are the alpine wetlands found near the summit plateau, a rare phenomenon in Chinese mountain systems. These marshy areas, fed by glacial meltwater and monsoon rain, are home to carnivorous plants, aquatic insects, and highland amphibians uniquely adapted to the cool, oxygen-thin environment. During certain seasons, the wetlands bloom with wildflowers, transforming the summit into a hidden garden above the clouds. Culturally, Mount Huawu has long been a site of spiritual pilgrimage. Nestled within the folds of the mountain are secluded Buddhist temples and Taoist shrines, many of which are centuries old and still in use today. These temples often remain unmarked on maps and are reached only by winding footpaths or through word of mouth. Within their weathered stone walls, monks maintain daily rituals, chanting sutras into the mist while burning incense curls upward into the clouded sky. Legends say that the mountaintop was once visited by immortals, who found in its silence the ideal place to meditate and ascend beyond the earthly realm. For travelers and trekkers, Mount Huawu offers a range of otherworldly experiences, from hiking through silent, mist-draped forests to standing on sheer cliffs where the world falls away beneath your feet. The climate changes rapidly with altitude and time of day. In the valleys, it can be humid and green, while just a few hundred meters higher, it becomes cool, breezy, and veiled in fog. Rainbows are common. So are sudden storms. And always, there is the sense that the mountain is alive, watching, breathing with the same rhythm as the wind that rustles the pines and ripples across the wetlands. Access to Mount Huawu is relatively limited, which has helped preserve its mystery. A few eco-lodges and research stations operate at its base, particularly near Hongya County, but the majority of the mountain is left untouched, save for narrow stone trails and primitive wooden walkways that wind through the forest. These paths are ancient, used for generations by hunters, herbalists, and pilgrims, and they traverse gorges, waterfalls, suspension bridges, and bamboo groves, offering moments of solitude that feel increasingly rare in the modern world. Perhaps most compelling is the feeling one gets atop Mount Huawu's cloud-covered summit. There, surrounded by silence and sky, looking out over a seemingly infinite ocean of peaks and vapor, the distinction between heaven and earth begins to dissolve. It's not merely scenic, it's transformative. A kind of forgetting happens. Not of identity or memory, but of urgency, of noise, of all the things that pull us away from the present moment. Mount Huawu doesn't simply impress with its beauty, it humbles with its stillness. It's the kind of place that doesn't just ask for admiration, it demands respect. Here, every drop of rain, every echo, every animal call is part of a living network that has existed long before us and will continue long after. To witness it is to understand that wilderness is not just what we find far from cities. It's a form of memory, of truth, and of time that runs deeper than our own. High in the northeastern reaches of Sichuan province, nestled between the transitional landscapes of the Tianzhu Mountains to the north and the Sichuan Basin to the south, rises a mountain that, though modest in height compared to the Himalayan giants, possesses a profound seasonal magic that draws pilgrims of beauty and solitude alike, Mount Guangwu. Known locally as Guangwushan, this mountain is celebrated across China for its fiery red maple forests in autumn, but beyond this seasonal spectacle lies a deeper realm, one of ancient forests, craggy ridgelines, hidden waterfalls, and a biodiversity that pulses with the rhythm of untouched nature. Rising to an elevation of about 2,507 meters, 8,225 feet, Mount Guangwu may not pierce the heavens like other peaks in western China, but it makes up for this with density, drama, and color. Here, the mountain does not emerge as a single isolated summit, but as a vast and rugged complex of peaks, gorges, and highland meadows, sprawling across an area of more than 830 square kilometers. The name Guangwu translates roughly to mountain of light and mist, and this is no poetic exaggeration. Even in the heat of summer or the depth of winter, the forests here are often wrapped in silken fog, diffusing the sun into shifting veils of light and shadow. The effect is one of constant visual softness, a painter's dream and a natural meditation. But it is in autumn, especially between late October and mid-November, that Mount Guangwu explodes into worldwide attention. Its vast forests of acer, maple, trees, interspersed with oaks, beeches, birches, and ash, undergo a kaleidoscopic transformation, turning brilliant shades of scarlet, crimson, gold, and flame orange. Entire valleys seem to catch fire with color, glowing from within under soft light and drifting mist. The effect is intensely cinematic, drawing photographers, hikers, poets, and families alike to witness the fleeting display. Local folklore describes the red leaves as the blood of autumn, a beautiful death, a final flourish before the quiet of winter. Among the most iconic spots is the Red Leaf Valley, where forest trails lead to suspended walkways offering panoramic views of multicolored canopies flowing over undulating terrain. From above, the forests resemble an enormous woven tapestry, each hill, each valley another patch of molten red sewn into a quilt of seasonal memory. As the leaves fall, the mountain becomes even more ethereal. Mist rises through bare trunks, and the rustling of leaves underfoot echoes like whispers from the past. Yet Mount Guangwu is not just a seasonal spectacle, it is a biological sanctuary, a time capsule of pre-glacial vegetation. It lies in a transitional zone between northern and southern Chinese floras, making it a biodiversity hotspot, especially for plant life. The forests are layered and lush, with over 2,100 recorded species of vascular plants, including rare medicinal herbs, ancient ferns, and some species of relic trees that once flourished in prehistoric climates. Botanists consider it a living museum of Eastern Asian vegetation, similar in importance to the Qinling Range or even parts of Yunnan. Wildlife also thrives here. The forested slopes and high valleys are home to masked civets, Chinese serows, golden pheasants, macaques, and clouded leopards, though the latter are elusive and rarely spotted. Birdsong fills the canopies during the warmer months, and in spring, the underbrush comes alive with amphibians and insects whose life cycles are tied intricately to the mountain's microclimates. The diversity of butterflies alone is astonishing, flitting in and out of sun-dappled glades and alongside streams where moss-covered rocks hum with the gentle flow of glacial water. Flowing through the folds of Guangwu are a number of crystal-clear rivers and waterfalls, nourished by highland springs and seasonal meltwater. The Yujin River and the Baigua stream cut deep gorges through the rock, where narrow bridges and cliff-hugging trails offer hikers access to secluded pools and roaring cascades. The Firelong Waterfall, Flying Dragon Waterfall, is particularly famous, a wide curtain of water that plunges dramatically from a mossy overhang, framed by cliffs and red-leaf trees in autumn. In summer, the pools beneath become refuges for hikers and wildlife alike. Mount Guangwu also carries immense historical and cultural weight. The area was once a crucial strategic frontier between the ancient states of Shu and Qin, and archaeological evidence suggests that footpaths across Guangwu were used for trade and military movement as early as the Warring States period. Local legends speak of ancient battles and mountain hermits, of Taoist sages who disappeared into caves to commune with the heavens. Some trails still follow these old stone routes, winding through valleys where abandoned temples and stone inscriptions sleep beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves. A major highlight of the region is the Guangwu Mountain National Forest Park, which includes numerous scenic zones, each offering its own blend of geology, flora, and hiking difficulty. The Mingyu Gorge, with its dramatic limestone walls, offers stunning river walks. The Wanghai Pavilion, or Sea-Watching Pavilion, sits atop a prominent peak, offering a view not of the ocean, but of the cloud sea that often swells below at dawn, making the mountaintops appear like islands in a white dreamscape. Trekking through Mount Guangwu is not strenuous in the Himalayan sense, but it is immersive and richly textured. Trails pass through caves, groves of century-old trees, bamboo forests, and granite ridgelines with views stretching for dozens of kilometers on clear days. The mountain's rhythms, birdsong at dawn, the soft drum of rain on leaves, the crunch of frost in early winter, speak to a deep continuity between nature and spirit, a sense that the land has always known how to be whole. And as night falls on Guangwu, the forests shift again. The colors vanish, replaced by moonlight filtered through bare limbs or pine boughs. The wind picks up. The fog returns. Small lamps in distant villages flicker to life in the valleys far below, and the stars emerge, not with the crystalline brilliance of high-altitude deserts, but a mist-softened glitter, like old stories remembered. Mount Guangwu, in its quiet grandeur, reminds us that not all beauty must shout to be heard. Sometimes it appears in cycles, in the rustle of falling leaves, the breath of a hidden deer, the return of spring blossoms after a long snow. It is not just a mountain of red leaves, it is a living, breathing harmony of forest, cloud, time, and transformation. To walk its trails is not simply to see the season, it is to be part of it. In the remote depths of central Yunnan, far from the beaten paths of tourists and cities, where the air hangs heavy with mist and the earth exhales the rich scent of ancient vegetation, rises a range cloaked in mystery and verdant life, Mount Ailao. Stretching over 500 kilometers from the southern edge of the Yunnan Plateau to the Red River, Honghe, Mount Ailao is not a solitary peak, but a sprawling massif, a wild backbone of green whose ridges harbor some of the last intact subtropical cloud forests in China, and whose ravines echo with the calls of rare and endangered species found nowhere else on Earth. The name Ailao itself carries echoes of deep antiquity, drawn from the ancient tribal states that once ruled this land in pre-imperial China. The range's highest point, Mount Daxushan, not to be confused with others of the same name, reaches 3,157 meters, 10,358 feet, and from there the terrain tumbles into steep valleys carved by rivers, waterfalls, and tectonic upheaval. The mountain straddles a critical ecological and cultural borderland, east of the Mekong River, west of the Red River, between temperate China and tropical Southeast Asia, between the Han Chinese lowlands and the highland cultures of the Hani, Yi, and Lahu peoples. The air on Mount Ailao is thick with humidity, often saturated with mist that rolls in from the valleys at dawn and recedes only by midday, if at all. This moisture is the lifeblood of its forests, ancient, layered, and dripping with biodiversity. At the heart of the range lies the Ailao Mountain National Nature Reserve, a protected zone covering nearly 504 square kilometers, sheltering one of the finest examples of subtropical evergreen broadleaf forests in East Asia. Here, the canopy is dominated by camphor trees, laurels, magnolias, chestnuts, and tree ferns, creating a multi-layered green cathedral through which sunlight filters in long, golden beams. This unique ecological setting has given rise to an astonishing concentration of endemic life forms, some of which are relics from the Tertiary period, survivors of climate shifts and glacial epochs. The flagship species of Mount Ailao's biological treasure chest is the elusive Indo-Chinese black-crested gibbon, Namascus concolor, one of the world's most endangered primates. With fewer than 2,000 individuals remaining, the majority of which live in Yunnan Mountains. This gibbon is a high canopy specialist, swinging gracefully through the forest, singing complex duets at dawn that reverberate like a flute across the valleys. Their presence is a sign of the forest's health and its evolutionary age, for these gibbons cannot survive without ancient, undisturbed forests. Equally rare is the black muntjac, a small, shy deer that moves like a shadow through the undergrowth, and the Yunnan box turtle, a critically endangered species once thought extinct. The Ailao Mountains are also a haven for clouded leopards, Asiatic black bears, civets, porcupines, and dozens of rare bird species, including the silver pheasant, Mrs. Hume's pheasant, and various laughing thrushes whose melodious calls echo through the valleys. Botanically, the richness is staggering. The reserve holds more than 2,400 species of plants, many of them medicinal or sacred to local cultures. The rhododendrons here can grow into towering trees, and the orchids and begonias found on mossy trunks seem painted into reality. Giant tree ferns, unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs, fan out in the mist like forgotten umbrellas from a prehistoric age. Epiphytes dangle from every available surface, drinking from the air, while rare fungi and lichen colonies silently decompose the forest floor, completing the eternal cycle of life and decay. Water is everywhere on Mount Ailao. Springs bubble from moss-covered stones. Countless waterfalls, some wide and gentle, others narrow and thunderous, tumble from ridges into deep, fern-draped ravines. One of the most famous, Dwari River Falls, plunges over tiers of rock and into blue-green pools, framed by banyan trees and flowering creepers. These waters are sacred to local communities, believed to be inhabited by spirits, and are often used in ritual purification or seasonal festivals. The human cultures of the Ailao region are as rich and layered as its ecology. For centuries, the mountain has been home to various highland ethnic minorities, each with their own language, customs, and relationship to the land. The Hani people, in particular, have developed a complex agroforestry system in the valleys below, cultivating terraced rice paddies in harmony with the mountain's hydrology. Their villages, built from wood and thatch, cluster on fog-draped ridges, and their polyphonic chanting, a form of singing that mimics natural sounds, is often performed in ceremonial gatherings to honor ancestral spirits and natural deities. The mountain is not just a backdrop to life here, it is an ancestor, a teacher, and a god. Sacred groves dot the high forest. Trees are wrapped with red ribbons, offerings are left at springs, and rituals are performed to ensure harmony between people and the forest spirits. The oral histories of these communities contain cosmologies centered on the mountain, stories of dragons sleeping in the valleys, of tigers that guard the ridgelines, and of cloud maidens who dance on the cliffs at sunrise. Access to Mount Ailao remains relatively restricted due to its remoteness and conservation importance. Researchers, eco-tourists, and spiritual seekers can enter certain parts of the reserve via designated trails, often guided by locals who know the paths by memory, not map. Hiking here is less about summiting and more about immersing, moving slowly through layered canopies, listening to dripping leaves, watching the fog retreat like a breath held and then released. There is no rush on Mount Ailao, only rhythm. At night, the mountain falls into deep silence. No city lights, no roads, just the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the breath of the mountain itself, cool, damp, alive. The stars here are faint through the constant mist, but sometimes the clouds break open like a curtain and the entire Milky Way spills across the sky. Fireflies blink in the darkness. Rivers continue their quiet descent. Mount Ailao is not a place for spectacle. It is a place for listening, for learning, for remembering the primordial language of forest and stone. It is the kind of mountain that changes those who walk its trails. Not in the grand, triumphant way of conquering a peak, but in the slow, silent erosion of ego, as the deeper self begins to listen to what the land has always known. In a world racing toward acceleration and noise, Mount Ailao remains still, watching, growing, remembering, and offering sanctuary to the old ways of life, both human and wild. In the shifting borderlands between Guizhou and Sichuan provinces, where the sky often lowers into the hills and the earth rises in twisted folds of stone, there lies a mountain range so hauntingly beautiful and geologically intricate that it seems born from the breath of myth, the Tianzhu Mountains. Unlike the sharp, snow-draped giants of western China or the vertical cast pillars of southern Guangxi, the Tianzhu Mountains embody an older, more subdued kind of grandeur, one shaped not by violence or fire, but by the slow, persistent chiseling of water, air, and time. Stretching for hundreds of kilometers across northwestern Guizhou into the southern reaches of Sichuan, the Delu Range is not dominated by a single iconic peak. Instead, it unfurls as a rugged, forested plateau riddled with karst formations, deep limestone ravines, natural arches, subterranean rivers, and mist-shrouded ridgelines. These highlands rise to elevations around 2,200 meters, 7,200 feet, in their highest parts. But the sense of elevation is softened by the density of forest and the frequent mists that pour through the valleys, cloaking the world in an otherworldly veil of silver and silence. Geologically speaking, the Delu Mountains are part of the Yunnan-Guizhou Plateau's vast karst ecosystem, a region formed from ancient seabeds uplifted over eons and gradually sculpted into undulating, pockmarked, and weathered terrain. Here, carbonate rock formations, primarily limestone and dolomite, have been dissolved over millions of years by rainfall and underground watercourses, giving rise to a landscape that is both dramatic above ground and labyrinthine below. Beneath the surface lies a honeycomb of caves, sinkholes, and subterranean rivers, some of which have yet to be fully mapped. Above ground, the Delu Highlands offer a picture of quiet sublimity. Peaks rise in rounded domes rather than jagged towers, their flanks covered in a rich tapestry of subtropical forest, bamboo groves, and highland meadows. In spring, the forest floor is embroidered with wildflowers, while in summer, the air becomes thick with moisture and the sound of cicadas. Autumn brings a flush of golden hues, while winter turns the forests frostbitten and still. Mist is the mountain's constant companion, especially in the early mornings when entire valleys vanish beneath a luminous white fog, leaving only treetops and cliffs to peek through like ghostly islands. Despite its remoteness, the Delu region is home to a rich diversity of life, both in terms of species and ecosystems. The range lies at a biogeographical crossroads, where elements of both tropical and temperate flora and fauna meet. Forests here harbor rare trees such as dove trees, Davidia involucrata, and golden larches, along with a variety of ferns, orchids, mosses, and medicinal plants. The limestone cliffs and caves are home to numerous endemic species of bats, amphibians, and cave-dwelling invertebrates, many of which are still being discovered by biologists. Among the larger mammals found in these forests are leopards, macaques, Asiatic black bears, serows, and the elusive clouded leopard, whose mottled coat blends perfectly with the shadowed underbrush. Birds thrive in the misty canopy, from black-headed cibias and crested goshawks to the highly vocal bar-throated minler. Reptiles and insects, particularly colorful moths and butterflies, are drawn to the region's moisture and abundant vegetation, making the Delu Mountains a crucial node in China's ecological web. But what truly sets the Delu Mountains apart is not only their natural richness but also their cultural depth. These highlands have been home for centuries to various ethnic minorities, including the Miao, Bui, Dong, and Tujia peoples, whose villages cling to the hillsides like vines, their wooden houses stacked in layers against the slope, their rice paddies cascading down in terraces. The way of life here has evolved in tandem with the land, not against it. Agriculture is conducted through age-old practices, often combining wet rice cultivation with forest preservation and the seasonal gathering of herbs. In the mornings, smoke curls from kitchen chimneys, mingling with the mountain mist, while the sounds of traditional reed pipes, lusheng, drift over the hills. Festivals in these mountain villages are marked by elaborate dress, intricate silver jewelry, and dances that mimic natural cycles of sowing, rain, harvest, and rest. Oral traditions speak of dragon spirits who sleep beneath the limestone peaks, of caves that lead to the underworld, and of immortals who once walked these ridges. Scattered throughout the Delu Mountains are hidden temples, cliff inscriptions, ancient tombs, and weathered shrines, many of which have been reclaimed by nature. Taoist hermits are said to have retreated into the caves and forests here during dynastic turbulence, finding in the mountains solitude a place to study the Tao, observe the natural order, and pass into legend. Some remote monasteries are still occupied, their incense rising daily into the mist, their chants echoing faintly through the ravines. For the modern traveler or seeker, the Delu Mountains are not easy to access, and that is part of their allure. There are few marked trails, and most exploration is done with local guides or through ecotourism routes supported by conservationists and ethnic community initiatives. Trekking through Delu is a sensory experience. Trails carved through damp rock, stone steps softened by moss, bamboo archways bending in silence, and sudden openings that reveal a hidden waterfall or a panoramic ridge. It is not a place of adrenaline or conquest, but of immersion, wonder, and reverence. Caves such as the Zhijin Cave, one of the most remarkable in Guizhou, are part of the same caste system and display the full theatrical glory of stalactites, stone curtains, and underground rivers, some illuminated by mineral veins and natural light shafts. Other, lesser-known caves remain entirely wild, accessible only by crawling through crevices or descending ropes into the earth's throat, where silence reigns and ancient water still sculpts its cathedral halls. What Daqing offers, more than beauty or biodiversity or myth, is stillness. A kind of primal quiet that speaks of the earth as it once was. The mists seem to carry memory, and the wind that threads through the limestone corridors carries the feeling that something ancient is watching, not threatening, but aware. In the Tianzhu Mountains, one does not feel above nature, but profoundly within it. In an era where noise and movement often define value, Daqing stands as a reminder of patience, of depth, of forgotten time. It is the type of landscape that does not yield its soul to speed or efficiency. It requires presence, attentiveness, humility. Every twisted root, every drop of mineral-laced water, every echoing bird call in the mist tells a story older than language. To walk these mountains is not merely to travel, it is to enter a space where stone, sky, and silence conspire to return you to something essential. Rising like a rugged spine across the western half of Shaanxi province, the Luliang Mountains are not known for dramatic elevation or snow-draped grandeur, but for something perhaps more profound, a deep interweaving of stone and civilization, where steep valleys cradle millennia of Chinese history, and cultural relics lie buried beneath layers of forest, wind, and dust. The Mount Luliang Range, stretching in a north-south direction along the eastern edge of the Yellow River, forms the natural boundary between the Lurs Plateau to the west and the Fen River Valley to the east, both of which are among the cradles of early Chinese civilization. Geologically speaking, Mount Luliang is not a singular peak, but rather a broken, undulating chain of rugged ridges and plateaus, punctuated by deep ravines and gorges carved by erosion and ancient seismic uplift. Its highest point, Guandishan, reaches 2,834 meters, 9,298 feet, and serves as the headwater source of the Fen River, which eventually joins the Yellow River. But while the Luliang Range is high enough to create dramatic topography, its real character lies in the steep-sided valleys that plunge between the ridgelines, narrow, forested corridors filled with shadow and silence, where villages cling to slopes and temples lie hidden in crags. These valleys have long served as passageways, not just for water and wildlife, but for culture, resistance, and spiritual retreat. The soils here are rich with loess, the fine, wind-blown sediment that defines much of northern China, making the lower hillsides ideal for early farming communities. Archaeological evidence reveals that people have inhabited this region since Neolithic times, and some of the earliest Chinese dynastic relics have been unearthed in caves and cliffside tombs throughout the range. Indeed, Mount Luliang is often called a mountain of relics, and for good reason. Scattered across its ridges are abandoned fortresses, ancient kill sites, stone steles, Buddhist cave carvings, and weather-worn temples that date back to the Tang, Song, and Yuan dynasties. Many of these remain unstudied or half-forgotten, overgrown by brush or buried in dust, making the entire range feel like a vast open-air museum, its galleries spread across hillsides and valleys, visited not by tourists but by wind and rain. One of the most remarkable sites is the Guandi Temple, dedicated to Guan Yu, the legendary general of the Three Kingdoms period, who is deified in Chinese folk religion as a god of loyalty, righteousness, and protection. This temple, located high in the Luliang Hills, has stood for centuries, its red walls faded, its roof tiles chipped by time, its interior cloaked in incense smoke. Pilgrims still come, especially during traditional festivals, climbing the stone steps cut into the mountainside to offer prayers and hang red ribbons in the wind. But beyond myth and monument, the mountain range was also a real battleground, most notably during the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Chinese Civil War. The complex topography of the Luliang Mountains provided cover and strategic advantage to guerrilla fighters, and many of its cliffs and caves became strongholds of the 8th Route Army, whose resistance efforts became legendary in northern China. In fact, the name Luliang Heroes has become emblematic in Chinese revolutionary lore, a symbol of bravery, sacrifice, and unwavering defiance against impossible odds. Remnants of this wartime history still remain: bunkers dug into hillsides, rusted relics of supply routes, memorials hidden in pine groves. In places, you can still find propaganda slogans from the 1940s, painted on rock walls in fading red ink, as though the mountain itself still remembers the voices of those who once defied death on its slopes. Ecologically, the Luliang Range is more austere than the lush cloud forests of southern China, but it holds its own wild elegance. The mountains are covered in mixed deciduous and coniferous forest, including Chinese pine, oak, cypress, and maple, which flush gold and crimson in the fall. In spring, the hillsides burst into bloom with wild apricot, cherry, and peach blossoms, a riot of color that contrasts beautifully with the dusty tones of the cliffs and terraces. The fauna here includes wild boar, foxes, hares, golden pheasants, and raptors such as eagles and hawks, which soar above the ridgelines on thermals that rise with the midday sun. The more remote and protected valleys even harbor populations of leopard cats and masked palm civets, elusive nocturnal creatures that slink through the undergrowth. Streams trickle from the higher ridges, flowing into the Fen River system and nourishing terraced fields below. Fields that still grow millet, sorghum, corn, and traditional medicinal herbs, much as they have for generations. Perhaps one of the most surreal and atmospheric features of Mount Luliang is the presence of mist and wind. Particularly in late autumn and early spring, low clouds crawl through the ravines, winding around cliffside temples and forests like a living spirit. The rustle of wind through dry pines, the lonely toll of a monastery bell, the echo of a crow's call across a stone terrace, all give the landscape a sense of timeless melancholy, as if the mountain exists partly in another world, one half remembered through stories passed down over centuries. For hikers and seekers, the Luliang Mountains offer a deeply textured experience. Trails are rarely manicured. Some ascend abruptly along worn stone steps, others wind through terraced fields, pass village shrines, and disappear into the valley fog. There is little infrastructure for tourism, and yet that is part of the mountain's appeal. You don't visit Mount Luliang to check a box on a travel list. You go to listen, to walk slowly, to discover the ancient marks left by those who came before, and to feel history breathing beneath your feet. At night, in one of the scattered villages or hilltop monasteries, under the sweep of stars above the dry ridges, the true character of Mount Luliang reveals itself: stoic, silent, resilient. This is not a landscape of grandeur for grandeur's sake. It is a mountain that has borne witness to the story of a nation. Through war and peace, empire and revolution, drought and harvest, it has stood, not imposing, but unyielding. It is said among some locals that the Luliang Mountains don't belong to the people belong to the mountains. And perhaps they're right. For in every valley, behind every shrine, within every ruin, the mountain holds its quiet claim, one not made of power or conquest, but of enduring presence. High in the rolling highlands of northern Guizhou, where the wind carries the scent of pine and the earth wakes each spring with the promise of color, lies a mountain that seems to bloom straight from myth, Mount Baihua, or Hundred-Flower Mountain. Its very name evokes visions of color, fragrance, and renewal, and it does not disappoint. Though less known internationally, Mount Baihua is one of Guizhou's most beloved natural treasures, revered by locals not only for its seasonal spectacle of wildflowers, but also for its graceful alpine meadows, highland wetlands, cool pine forests, and the profound sense of peaceful isolation that drapes its ridges like morning fog. Mount Baihua rises to an elevation of about 2,900 meters, 9,514 feet, making it one of the highest peaks in Guizhou province. It lies within the greater fold of the Wuming Mountains, a transitional range that bridges the Yunnan Guizhou Plateau with the misty mountain corridors of southern China. What distinguishes Baihua from its surrounding peaks is not its height or severity, but its remarkable biodiversity and the sheer abundance of seasonal flora that transform the mountain into a natural flower garden on a scale and intensity rarely seen elsewhere in East Asia. Each year, as winter's grip fades and spring begins to stir the land, the mountain undergoes an astonishing metamorphosis. First come the snow lotuses, the earliest pioneers pushing through frost-kissed soil. Then, over the weeks that follow, a botanical cascade begins: rhododendrons, azaleas, alpine poppies, orchids, wild irises, tiger lilies, anemones, edelweiss, and hundreds more, each species timed by nature's calendar, each layer adding to a complex and living mosaic of texture and color. By late spring and early summer, the mountain's high meadows and slopes become an almost unbroken field of bloom, painting the land in hues of violet, scarlet, yellow, and ivory. Botanists have recorded over 1,500 species of flowering plants on Mount Baihua, many of which are endemic to this region or considered rare. Some plants here date back to tertiary relic communities, remnants of ancient ecosystems that once blanketed much of subtropical Asia. The mountain's microclimates, shaped by its elevation, varied slope exposures, and moisture patterns, allow a diversity of plants to grow in tight proximity, from cool temperate species near the summit to subtropical ferns and mosses in the lower ravines. But flowers are not the only marvels of Baihua. The mountain also supports a wide range of animal life, drawn by its ecological richness and relative seclusion. Among the mammals spotted here are red pandas, serows, Chinese muntjacs, and masked palm civets, along with the more elusive Asian golden cats and clouded leopards, which prowl the deeper woods. Butterflies, of course, are ubiquitous during flowering season, clouds of them rising from blossoms like living confetti, and the air hums with bees, dragonflies, and tiny birds flitting from flower to flower. Ornithologists consider Baihua an underrated birding site, home to over 200 recorded bird species, from the golden pheasant and silver pheasant, to highland specialists such as the black-throated tit, red-tailed laughing thrush, and the crested bunting. These birds, alongside frogs, insects, and rustling rodents, contribute to the choral soundscape that defines the mountain at dawn, not silence, but a symphony of life awakening with the sun. During the peak bloom, usually from late April through June, pilgrims, nature lovers, and photographers make their way up the mountain trails, which wind through forested glades, rise into alpine pastures, and curve around flower-filled slopes. These are not severe hikes. Baihua is welcoming in its topography, offering gentle ascents and panoramic viewpoints without the grueling conditions of more extreme peaks. The experience is more akin to wandering through a living painting, a place where every footstep lands on a new color, and every gust of wind brings a new fragrance. One of the most beloved spots on the mountain is the Alpine Flower Sea, a broad, open meadow stretching across the southwestern face of the summit ridge. In peak bloom, it becomes a living kaleidoscope, the sky above piercing blue, the earth below exploding in petals, and the horizon punctuated by distant ridges softened in haze. Small stone paths allow visitors to walk without disturbing the growth, and wooden viewing pavilions are discreetly placed along the edges for resting and taking in the panorama. But Baihua is not just a natural wonder, it is also a place of spiritual resonance, infused with folk traditions, ancestral rites, and a quiet reverence for the cycles of life. In nearby villages, especially among the Yi and Miao peoples, the flowering of the mountain is celebrated through seasonal festivals, including the Flower Worship Festival, where locals dress in traditional attire and ascend the mountain to offer songs, dances, and handmade crafts at sacred trees or springs. These celebrations are not just aesthetic, they are spiritual expressions of gratitude, for the rain, for the soil, for the balance of the world. Old shrines, sometimes no more than a weathered stone or a small wooden altar, are scattered along the trails, often near sources of spring water or beneath ancient trees. Red ribbons flutter in the wind, tied by villagers with prayers for health, harvest, and harmony. Some of these practices date back centuries, blending animism, Taoism, and local ancestor worship into a seamless spiritual ecology that treats the mountain not merely as landscape, but as a living being, a maternal spirit, a giver of color and life. In late summer, as the flowers begin to fade and the grasses grow tall and golden, the mountain shifts once again. The butterflies thin. The air grows cooler. Rain clouds gather earlier in the afternoon. In autumn, Mount Baihua dons a new palette, not floral, but arboreal, as the surrounding forests of maple, birch, and oak burn with amber and fire. Even in winter, when frost silvercoats the meadows and only a few hardy evergreen shrubs remain in bloom, the mountain retains its quiet grace, a kind of peaceful sleep, as if gathering strength to bloom once more. At its heart, Mount Baihua is not a mountain to conquer, it is a mountain to witness. A celebration of transience. A poem written in petals and wind. In a world that often seems grey and hurried, this mountain dares to burst forth in color, not just once, but year after year, with absolute commitment to beauty, resilience, and renewal. And if you stand still at its summit, among the flowers, listening to the soft rush of the wind through grass and the buzz of unseen wings, you may feel something ancient and wordless stir inside you, not awe, exactly, but a recognition. That this place, in all its color and stillness, is not something separate from you. It is a mirror of what life could be, fragile, radiant, and impossibly alive. Tucked into the richly forested folds of northern Zhejiang province, just a short distance from the historic city of Hangzhou, lies a mountain that feels like it belongs in both a scholar's ink painting and a poet's dream, Mount Xianglu. Though not soaring in height or famed across continents, Xianglu, meaning incense burner mountain, possesses a quiet dignity and layered cultural resonance that far exceed its elevation. It is the kind of place where moss carpets the steps of ancient paths, where the trees seem to whisper old tales, and where spirit, history, and nature intertwine in seamless continuity. Rising to a modest height of around 400 to 600 meters, Mount Xianglu may not command the skyline like China's loftier ranges, but it has long drawn pilgrims, poets, monks, and recluses seeking clarity, meditation, and communion with the natural world. The mountain is often bathed in morning mist, especially in the humid months from spring through autumn, and this natural incense, a swirling blend of fog, leaf vapor, and temple smoke, likely inspired the mountain's evocative name. From a distance, the peaks appear to exhale plumes of white fog, just like a burning censer, rising toward heaven. Situated near the famed West Lake, Shihu, and within reach of Hangzhou's ancient temple networks and imperial gardens, Mount Xianglu has long existed as an extension of Hangzhou's cultural landscape. The area is part of a region immortalized in centuries of Chinese poetry, landscape painting, and philosophical thought. A geography of idealized beauty where nature is not separate from humanity but is its highest expression. Xianglu is part of this spiritual geography, a natural sanctuary shaped by Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian influences, layered one upon the other like sediment on a riverbed. The mountain's forest cover is lush and evergreen, composed primarily of Chinese sweet gum, camphor trees, pines, maples, and seasonal bursts of plum blossoms and magnolias. Bamboo groves line the lower slopes, their slender stalks creaking softly in the breeze, while streams bubble over rocks worn smooth by centuries of rain and footfall. The gentle terrain makes Mount Xianglu accessible yet mysterious, with winding footpaths, crumbling stone steps, and forest trails that appear to disappear into mist or curve toward timeless courtyards. Indeed, it is not the summit that defines Xianglu, but its cultural textures. Among the most historically significant structures nestled within the folds of the mountain is the Xianglu Temple, an ancient Buddhist retreat originally founded during the Tang dynasty, though rebuilt and restored across the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties. The temple is modest in scale but monumental in spirit. Its sloped tile roofs, red-painted pillars, and elaborate wood carvings sit in harmony with the landscape, deliberately understated, a spiritual architecture that invites contemplation rather than grandeur. Incense coils burn slowly in the temple's prayer halls, casting spirals of smoke into dim interiors where golden statues of Guanyin and the historical Buddha sit with patient smiles. Pilgrims often leave handwritten notes, flowers, or simple coins before the altars, and the surrounding stone terraces are inscribed with sutras and verses etched in calligraphy, faded but still legible, the voices of past monks and scholars who once found stillness here. Beyond Buddhism, Mount Xianglu has also served as a refuge for Taoist recluses and wandering poets, particularly during times of political upheaval. The mountain's seclusion made it ideal for hermits, scholars, and former officials who withdrew from court life to seek harmony with the Tao. Many of the stone pavilions and garden ruins that dot the forested slopes were once private retreats or meditation sites, places where men and women of letters would study the classics, write poetry, and observe the seasons change in silence. One such pavilion, known as the Quiet Spring Pavilion, sits beside a natural spring at mid-altitude and has long been a site of literary pilgrimage. According to local legend, the Tang dynasty poet Bai Juyi, who served as governor of Hangzhou and composed many works about West Lake and its surroundings, once visited Xianglu and composed verses beneath the ancient trees. Whether true or apocryphal, the story reflects how deeply this mountain has been entwined with the inner world of Chinese literati culture. Nature here is not merely observed, it is read, conversed with, meditated upon. The rustling of the leaves is a line of poetry. The curve of a pine against mist is a brushstroke. The call of a cuckoo from unseen branches becomes a koan on impermanence. In spring, the mountain erupts with fragrance and sound. Plum blossoms perfume the air, bees swarm around newly opened flowers, and the forest seems to shimmer with life. In summer, the canopy is dense and cooling, a perfect refuge from the urban heat below. Autumn brings golden light, falling red maple leaves, and the arrival of solitary cranes and songbirds. Winter covers the upper slopes in a quiet frost, and though flowers fade, the pines remain, still and eternal, like the mountain itself. Today, While some parts of Mount Xianglu are managed as part of regional ecological parks or cultural heritage sites, much of it remains peacefully undeveloped. There are no loud tour groups, no commercialized peaks with cable cars or neon signs. Instead, there are stone lanterns half covered in moss, pathways softened by fallen leaves, and the soft tapping of rain on temple roofs. Locals still visit regularly to perform ancestral rites, practice Tai Chi, or offer prayers. For travelers, the mountain offers serenity without spectacle, depth without drama. At dusk, as the sun slips below the tree line and the valley begins to fill with fog, the mountain lives up to its name. The air becomes thick and fragrant. The incense from the temple mingles with the scent of damp pine and earth. Lanterns are lit along shaded paths. Crickets begin their night song. Somewhere above, the forest exhales. To walk Mount Xianglu is not to seek adventure, but to step back into alignment, with oneself, with tradition, with the slow and sacred rhythms of the natural world. It is a place that asks nothing of you, only that you walk slowly, breathe deeply, and listen. Listen to the wind in the trees. Listen to the voices of the past. Listen to the mountain as it burns incense into the sky, a silent offering to eternity. Just to the north of Tianjin, cradled in the arms of the Yang Mountains, lies a peak that has whispered to emperors, inspired poets, and drawn pilgrims for over 1,000 years. Mount Pan, also known as Panshan, is not just a mountain in the physical sense. It is a cultural monument carved into the natural world, where every winding path, curling pine, and weather-worn stone seems to hold the imprint of imperial reverence and spiritual aspiration. With its elevation of 858 meters, 2,815 feet, at its main peak, Guayua Peak, Mount Pan is neither the tallest nor the most remote mountain in China, but it is one of the most storied. The mountain's fame, particularly during the Ming and Qing dynasties, came not from its geological features alone, but from how those features were enshrined in the imaginations of emperors, monks, and scholars alike. The Qianlong Emperor, in particular, was famously enamored with Panshan. He visited the mountain more than 30 times, composing over 100 poems about it, commissioning temples and pavilions, and declaring, with characteristic flourish, that if one has seen Mount Pan, there is no need to visit the southern mountains. And it is easy to see why. Panshan embodies the idealized Chinese landscape: tall and narrow pine trees curling around jagged stone outcrops, deep ravines laced with clear streams, mist-swelled ridgelines, and ancient temples tucked into forested ledges. Every turn along its trails offers a new vignette of balance, between rock and root, sky and stone, man and nature. Geologically, Panshan is part of the eastern Yang mountain range, composed primarily of granite sculpted by wind and rain into strange and evocative forms. There are 5 main peaks, each with poetic names: Guayua Peak, Hanging Moon Peak, Zilin Peak, Purple Forest Peak, Zhohua Peak, Nine Flower Peak, Wujin Peak, Five Swords Peak, and Yunlu Peak, Cloud Road Peak. These names reflect not only physical features but also philosophical ideals, the blending of aesthetics, spirituality, and geomancy. One of the most enchanting aspects of Panshan is its sacred path network, a meticulously laid out series of stone staircases, bridges, terraces, and trails that weave through forests and over cliffs, connecting a constellation of Buddhist and Daoist temples, pavilions, inscribed boulders, and scenic viewpoints. Unlike modern mountain parks designed for efficiency, these ancient paths were created with spiritual pacing in mind, designed to slow the body and empty the mind. Among the most famous religious sites is the Qiancheng Temple, originally built during the Tang dynasty. Though it has been rebuilt and restored over the centuries, its location remains unchanged, nestled into a bend of the mountain where water, stone, and sunlight meet in auspicious harmony. Pilgrims have long come to this temple to pray for clarity, health, and insight, lighting incense beneath towering pines as monks chant in the main hall. The air here is thick with pine resin, temple smoke, and the hush of reverence. Nearby is the Wansong Temple, Temple of 10,000 Pines, named for the dense conifer forest that surrounds it. The temple is modest in size but notable for its elegantly inscribed steles, some etched with the calligraphy of imperial visitors. These inscriptions, left by figures such as Emperor Kangxi and Qianlong, serve as both historical record and artistic treasure. It's not uncommon to find tourists and pilgrims alike pressing paper against the stone and brushing ink over the carvings to capture these timeless scripts. As you climb higher up the mountain, the trees thin slightly, and the rock formations become more dramatic. One of the most famous is Tianzhu Peak, which resembles a pillar rising like a finger pointing toward heaven. Legends say that immortals once gathered here to observe earthly affairs. On misty mornings, this stone spire becomes nearly translucent in the haze, giving it a ghost-like quality that has inspired poets for centuries. Flora and fauna here are also notable. Panshan's climate allows for a mixture of temperate deciduous trees, including maple, birch, and oak, alongside gnarled Chinese pines and bamboo groves. The autumn foliage is breathtaking, entire hillsides igniting gold, crimson, and orange, drawing photographers and hikers from all over China. During spring, wild magnolias and azaleas bloom in quiet clusters, their delicate petals littering the stone steps like nature's own confetti. Birdsong is constant on the mountain, with species such as the crested myna, magpie robin, and collared finchbill adding to the melodic soundscape. On quieter trails, one might glimpse a squirrel bounding across a branch, or a golden pheasant darting into the underbrush, flashes of movement that connect the walker back to the ancient rhythms of this living mountain. What makes Panshan particularly special is the synthesis of man-made beauty and natural design. The stone pavilions, such as Jingyu Pavilion, Moon Viewing Pavilion, and Tsuegu Pavilion, Emerald Valley Pavilion, are placed with architectural precision according to feng shui principles, offering not only shelter and rest, but also perfectly framed views of surrounding peaks, forests, and rivers. These were designed for reflection, places where scholars could sit, sip tea, and compose poetry, or simply let the mind wander. And compose they did. Mount Pan's poetic legacy is vast. Tang and Song dynasty literati, Confucian scholars, and Buddhist monks have all left behind verses extolling its seasonal moods, its hidden springs, and its solitary paths. But it was the Qing dynasty that truly elevated Panshan to national fame. The Qianlong Emperor, a master calligrapher and ardent traveler, not only composed poems but also inscribed his works onto stone tablets and cliff faces throughout the mountain, declaring Panshan one of the top 15 famous mountains of China. Even today, visitors climb the stone paths reading his verses aloud, letting the syllables echo through pine-shadowed corridors. In the forest stillness, the heart finds peace. On Panshan's slope, the clouds never cease. Modern amenities have arrived at the base of the mountain: small inns, tea houses, souvenir stalls, but the upper slopes remain remarkably untouched. Hiking the full circuit of Panshan's sacred path takes several hours, not because the distances are great, but because the mountain encourages slowness. One must stop, sit, reflect, watch the wind stir the pine needles. Notice the way the sun plays across mossy stone. Listen to the distant sound of a temple bell. In a world of speed and spectacle, Mount Pan endures as a sanctuary of rhythm and poetry, a reminder of the ancient Chinese belief that to ascend a mountain is to ascend the self. Here, emperors laid down their worries, monks chased enlightenment, and countless ordinary people found serenity among the winding steps and whispering trees. Mount Pan does not shout for attention. It sings in quiet couplets, etched into stone and sky alike. And for those who truly listen, it offers not just scenery, but a conversation with history, spirit, and the unhurried breath of the earth itself. Rising like a sentinel over the heart of China, nestled between the Yellow River to the north and the Luoyang Basin to the west, stands one of the most sacred and storied mountains in Chinese civilization, Mount Song, Songshan. Located in Henan Province, this ancient range is far more than a geographical landmark. It is a place where myth, philosophy, religion, and martial tradition converge, where cloud-shrouded temples bear the footprints of sages, monks, emperors, and warriors, and where the pulse of Chinese civilization seems to echo through every pine needle and carved stone stair. Mount Song is not a single peak but a vast massif with 72 smaller peaks, straddling the natural midpoint of China's traditional 9 provinces, hence often referred to as the Central Sacred Mountain in Chinese cosmology. As one of the 5 great mountains of China, it has been revered for over 3,000 years, not only as a seat of spiritual power but as a cradle of philosophy and cultural identity. Geologically, Mount Song is one of the oldest mountain ranges in China, with rock formations dating back over 3.6 billion years, so ancient that it has become a geological wonder, nicknamed the textbook of the Earth by Chinese scientists. The region is part of the Songshan Geopark, recognized by UNESCO for its fault line exposures, deeply eroded ridges, and limestone cliffs that reveal slices of Earth's crust like pages in a colossal stone ledger. These formations stretch across a terrain of steep ravines, granite towers, caves, and terraces, veiled in forests and seasonal mist. Yet it is Mount Song's human history that gives it its immortal character. Most famously, it is the home of the Shaolin Temple, the legendary birthplace of Chan, Zen, Buddhism and Chinese martial arts. Established in 495 CE by Emperor Suwen of the Northern Wei dynasty, the Shaolin Temple was originally built to house the Indian monk Bodhidharma, who is said to have meditated for 9 years facing a cave wall near the temple's base. It was here that Chan Buddhism, a fusion of Indian dhyana meditation and Chinese Taoist principles, took root and blossomed. But Shaolin is also known for its martial prowess. According to legend, Bodhidharma introduced movements and breathing techniques to help monks maintain physical discipline during long meditations. These evolved into the Shaolin martial arts system, one of the most extensive and refined in the world. From staff techniques to animal-style forms, from internal energy cultivation, qigong, to acrobatic combat, the Shaolin monks developed a tradition that became not just a physical discipline, but a spiritual and philosophical path. They trained for enlightenment, defense of the Dharma, and in many cases, the defense of the temple itself. The temple complex today remains both a monastery and a martial arts academy, where robed monks train in synchronized motion at dawn beneath whispering pine trees, their movements echoing generations of discipline. Stone carvings in the pagoda forest behind the temple, a haunting grove of over 200 stone and brick pagodas, built to honor deceased monks, date back to the Tang dynasty, their worn edges marked with both moss and memory. These pagodas are among the most concentrated and best-preserved monastic burial sites in China, and walking among them feels like wandering through a stone chorus of past lives. But Mount Song's spiritual significance predates even the Shaolin Temple. The region was revered by Taoists, Confucians, and Buddhists alike, making it a rare confluence of the three teachings that form the philosophical core of Chinese civilization. The Zhongyue Temple, located at the foot of the mountain, is one of China's oldest Taoist temples, originally constructed during the Qin dynasty and greatly expanded during the Tang. Dedicated to the god of Mount Song, this temple was considered a ritual center for imperial offerings, especially during the Song and Ming dynasties, when emperors performed ceremonial sacrifices here to ensure harmony between heaven and earth. Within the temple walls are immense stone statues, sacred pavilions, ancient tablets, and a collection of celestial charts and cosmological symbols, reflecting the Taoist emphasis on balance, nature, and the movement of the stars. The complex itself is aligned according to feng shui principles, and its layout mirrors the cosmological diagram of heaven and earth, a microcosm of the universe carved into stone. In contrast, the Songyang Academy, nearby, one of the 4 great academies of ancient China, represents the Confucian legacy of Mount Song. It was a center of scholarly learning for nearly a millennium, where generations of Confucian scholars debated ethics, politics, and the metaphysics of human nature. The enormous cypress trees within its grounds, some over 1,500 years old, are said to have been planted by emperors and sages, and their massive trunks seem to hold centuries of whispered wisdom. Winding through all of this is the mountain's natural beauty, subtle and solemn. The trails here pass through dense pine forests, over rushing creeks, and up granite staircases chiseled directly into cliff faces. Small shrines peek out from crevices. Inscriptions left by emperors, generals, and monks cling to sheer rock walls. One such site, the Taisha Cave, is a narrow hollow believed to have sheltered Bodhidharma, while Sanhuangzai, perched on a high ridge, is a fortress-like monastery offering panoramic views of the Songshan Range, its tiled roofs and crimson beams seeming to float above the clouds. In spring, wildflowers and green shoots lace the forest floor. In summer, cicadas sing in the heat and rain clouds sweep over the peaks. Autumn transforms the hills into burnished golds and reds, and winter dusts the pagodas and pine branches with snow, turning the temples into monochrome ink paintings come to life. Despite modern attention and tourism, parts of Mount Song remain astonishingly silent and undisturbed. One can still find monks performing walking meditation on stone paths in the early morning, their saffron robes fluttering in the wind, their bare feet touching ground that has carried millions. Modern martial arts schools still echo with the slaps and grunts of training. Scholars still visit Songyang Academy, placing themselves in the long continuum of thought. And pilgrims still light incense at shrines dedicated to ancient mountain gods, whispering prayers that blur the line between past and present. Mount Song is not just a destination, it is a living testament to the power of cultural continuity. It represents the convergence of body, mind, and spirit. It contains within its peaks the arc of Chinese metaphysics, the beauty of ancient texts, the strength of trained fists, the serenity of temple bells, and the unbroken hum of history. To ascend Mount Song is to walk the path of sages, to breathe the air of both struggle and enlightenment. And whether one comes as a tourist, a martial artist, a monk, or a seeker of quiet, all will find themselves drawn into something greater, an inheritance of thought, discipline, and sacred stillness that transcends time. In the heart of Guizhou province, where the land crumples into an endless weave of green mountains, deep karst valleys, and hidden water systems, there rises a peak whose surreal form could just as easily belong to a dreamscape or the painted scrolls of ancient Daoist mystics. This is Mount Tianzhu, or Heavenly Pillar Mountain, a name that captures both its spiritual stature and the awe-inspiring verticality of its limestone formations. Distinct from its more famous namesake in Anhui, the Tianzhu Mountain of Guizhou is a world apart, raw, wild, unpolished, and profoundly otherworldly. Located near the county of Kaishui, close to the borders of Sichuan and Yunnan, Mount Tianzhu is the centerpiece of a vast karst landscape, where towering limestone spires, deep sinkholes, labyrinthine caves, and underground rivers create a natural terrain so complex and alien it often feels like a gateway to another world. This region, part of the South China Karst, has been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Mount Tianzhu stands as one of its most iconic landmarks. Rising to an elevation of approximately 1,800 meters, 5,905 feet, the mountain is known for its sharp pinnacles, many of which shoot up hundreds of meters from the valley floor in shapes that resemble swords, daggers, pagodas, towers, and even mythical beasts. These formations are the result of millions of years of water erosion acting on soluble limestone, a slow and persistent shaping by nature that has carved this mountain into a vertical wonderland of stone and void. The central pillar of the mountain, the namesake Tianzhu Peak, appears like a solitary spire reaching up to heaven, a vertical monolith that seems to defy gravity. Its nearly smooth face and impossible height make it difficult to climb and almost mystical to behold, especially when morning mist curls around its base, concealing the valley below and making it appear as though it floats in the sky. But Mount Tianzhu is not a place that reveals itself in one sweeping view. It unfolds in layers and mysteries, through narrow defiles, into vast open grottos, and down into caverns and caves that echo with dripping water and wind-blown whispers. Beneath the surface of the visible mountain lies an entire subterranean network of karst caves, many of which stretch for kilometers underground. Stalactites hang like crystal swords from the ceilings, while subterranean rivers wind their way through sculpted rock corridors, forming hidden lakes and underground waterfalls. One of the most famous caverns in the Tianzhu range is the Yinxian Cave, literally the cave where immortals hide. This massive chamber is filled with otherworldly formations, towering stone columns, glowing crystal curtains, and even natural bridges and arches shaped entirely by the slow drip of mineral-rich water. Legends say ancient sages and reclusive immortals once meditated in these depths, hiding from the chaos of the world above to cultivate longevity and wisdom in silence. Above ground, the biodiversity of the Tianzhu region is astonishing. The steep, moist, and heavily forested slopes create microclimates that harbor a dazzling array of flora and fauna. Botanists have identified over 2,000 species of plants in the surrounding reserve, including rare orchids, towering ferns, and ancient cycads that date back to the Jurassic era. The forest canopy is alive with macaques, clouded leopards, flying squirrels, and a symphony of birdsong, from the calls of crested kingfishers to the shrill notes of tree-dwelling thrushes. This richness of biodiversity is not just a spectacle, it is a spiritual tapestry. For centuries, local ethnic groups such as the Miao and Bui have held the mountain sacred, embedding it into their folklore, seasonal rituals, and animistic beliefs. They believe that the peaks are inhabited by mountain spirits, and many natural formations are given names like Dragon Ridge, Celestial Lady Peak, Phoenix Gate, or Tiger Reclining Cave. Ritual offerings are sometimes left at high ledges or stone altars, and ancestral shrines can be found in hidden alcoves, guarded by faded paper charms and the scent of old incense. The mountain also holds historical layers, with ruins of ancient watchtowers, stone steps, and relics of cliffside temples that date back to the Tang and Song dynasties. While many of these structures have been partially claimed by vegetation, their stone foundations remain, merging with nature in a way that feels not like decay, but like reunion. These spiritual sites, often built in impossibly inaccessible places, mirror the Daoist belief that the path to transcendence lies not in comfort, but in ascetic communion with the wild. Perhaps most remarkable of all is the way the landscape plays with scale and perception. What seems like a narrow fissure might open into a massive stone amphitheater. A cave mouth might conceal a passage hundreds of meters long. Paths are often hewn directly into cliff faces, protected only by narrow rails or prayer flag-laced ropes. And at every turn, the scenery shifts with light and weather. A sunny morning turns the limestone cliffs golden and radiant. A rainy afternoon swathes them in shadow and mossy gloom. At dawn and dusk, when the fog begins to roll through the ravines, the entire mountain seems to dissolve into myth, a place untethered from linear time, where the boundary between earth and sky feels thin and shifting. To walk through Mount Changbai is to enter a land of contrasts, between weight and lightness, solid rock and flowing water, sunlight and subterranean shadow. It challenges the notion of permanence and invites reflection on the fragility and power of nature. A slow, persistent sculptor that turns even the hardest stone into pillars of elegance. Unlike many popular mountains in China, Mount Changbai remains largely untouched by mass tourism. The infrastructure is minimal. Trails are natural and sometimes treacherous. Local guides, often members of the Miao or Bui communities, lead visitors through the terrain not as tourists, but as guests in a sacred space. Their stories are as integral to the mountain as the stones themselves, and listening to them. Tales of lovers turned to stone, of dragons sleeping beneath peaks, of caves that echo back your destiny, becomes part of the journey. In a world filled with curated beauty and filtered experience, Mount Changbai offers something raw, immersive, and humbling. It reminds us that true wonder is not always bright or convenient. Sometimes it is hidden behind a veil of mist, waiting for those willing to climb a little higher, descend a little deeper, or simply pause long enough to listen to the mountain's quiet voice. Here, in the limestone heart of Guizhou, the earth does not just rise, it speaks. And what it says is older than language and deeper than stone. In the boundless north of China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, where the vast grasslands ripple like ocean waves beneath a boundless sky, there rises a range of mountains that seem to float between earth and cloud, neither entirely alpine nor entirely steppe, but something uniquely their own. This is Mount Daqing Shan, also known as the Daqing Mountains, a name that translates to Great Green Mountain, though the palette it paints across the landscape is far more nuanced, from the golden brown of windblown steppe to the silver green of sagebrush, the soft jade of wild grasses, and the smoky blue of distant ridgelines. Unlike China's more craggy and rugged southern peaks, Daqing Shan is a gentle, rolling range, stretching for nearly 300 kilometers across central Inner Mongolia, forming the southern edge of the Hatao Plain and creating a natural divide between the Mongolian Plateau and the Yellow River Valley. While its highest peaks reach around 2,000 meters, the range is less defined by sharp elevation and more by its undulating harmony with the grasslands that surround and flow through it. Here, mountain and steppe are not opposites, but interwoven forces, and it is this unique geography that gives Daqing Shan its surreal and hauntingly beautiful quality. Seen from a distance, the Daqing Mountains appear like waves of velvet rising from a sea of green, their rounded crests soft and inviting. But as one approaches, the texture of the landscape shifts, from open plains covered in wildflowers and aromatic herbs, to steeper granite outcrops, weathered cliffs, and forested gullies where deer, hares, and even the occasional fox dart between twisted pine trunks and low shrubs. The terrain is an elegant dialogue between grassy openness and rugged stone, breezy calm and sudden vertical drama. The region is rich in both natural and cultural history, deeply entwined with the nomadic heritage of the Mongolian peoples and the strategic importance of Inner Mongolia as a frontier zone between northern and central China. In ancient times, the Daqing Shan Range marked the boundary between the agrarian Han Chinese civilizations to the south and the steppe empires of the north, the Xiongnu, the Khitan, and later the Mongols under Genghis Khan. Echoes of this frontier life still hum through the mountains, not only in the remnants of watchtowers, forts, and trading paths, but in the songs, stories, and ceremonies of the people who inhabit the surrounding grasslands. One of the most renowned areas within the Daqing Shan is the Tengzal Grassland Scenic Area, located near Hohhot, the capital of Inner Mongolia. Here, the mountains and grasslands blend into one of the most sublime highland steppe environments in all of China. From late spring to early autumn, the hills are blanketed in alpine wildflowers: bright yellow arnica, violet asters, deep red primroses, and the pale blue of gentian. The air is scented with wild thyme, and the wind carries the soft clang of grazing livestock bells, blending with the distant strains of Mongolian throats singing or the twang of a mooring kur, the traditional horsehead fiddle. Above the flower fields, ridges rise into windswept plateaus dotted with granite boulders and karst formations, sculpted by millennia of wind erosion. These stone sentinels, worn smooth or broken into jagged silhouettes, bear local names like Sleeping Lion, Sky-Cutting Sword, and the Eagle's Beak. Their shapes are so vivid and strange that local herders say they are the petrified forms of legendary beasts or gods who once roamed these mountains. There is also a profound spiritual layer to the Daqing Shan range. The mountains are home to a number of Tibetan Buddhist temples, many of them built centuries ago by Mongolian Buddhists who followed the Gelug tradition. Among the most revered is the Dazhao Temple, in nearby Hohhot, not directly on the range, but deeply connected to the spiritual life of the region. Built in the 16th century, it is a major pilgrimage site where lamas chant mantras, devotees spin prayer wheels, and yak butter lamps flicker in golden halls. Smaller monasteries and prayer sites, the Daqing foothills, often at high passes or hidden forest glades, marked by colorful prayer flags fluttering in the wind, or cairns built of piled stones and bone-white antlers, offerings to the mountain spirits. Hiking through Daqing Shan is an experience of gradual revelation. Trails snake up gentle slopes into more rugged uplands, often used by shepherds and local foragers rather than tourists. There is little formal infrastructure. Instead, the paths are worn by generations of feet and hooves. A day's trek might bring you to crystal-clear mountain springs, alpine meadows buzzing with bees, or sheltered rock overhangs where prehistoric petroglyphs can still be found, silent testaments to a time before writing, when the mountains were the only archive. Fauna here are elusive but diverse. Steppe eagles soar on thermal winds above the ridges. Marmots and pikas scurry through the grasses, their calls echoing across the valleys. The region is also home to roe deer, wolves, and in remote corners, even snow leopards, a shy and ghost-like presence rarely seen but always felt in stories. In summer, herders bring their flocks to graze on the upper slopes, setting up yurts ringed with firewood and tethered horses, continuing a lifestyle that has remained largely unchanged for centuries. At night, the true magic of the Daqing Mountains reveals itself. With little light pollution and high elevation, the sky becomes a dome of stars so vast and close, it feels as if you could reach up and touch the constellations. Milky Way bands stretch from ridge to ridge, and shooting stars streak across the horizon like silent omens. In the cold stillness, the mountains seem to breathe, the rocks, the wind, the grass all humming with a quiet vitality. Unlike China's more popular mountain destinations, Mount Daqing is not a spectacle designed for crowds. It is a place of resonance, of expansive silences, and of harmonious contrasts, where open grasslands crash against stone ridges, where Buddhist chants drift over windswept valleys, and where the memory of horseback empires lingers in the contours of the land. To walk through these mountains is to inhabit a space suspended between time periods, where past and present, nature and spirit, converge. Mount Daqing is not grand in the dramatic way of Himalayan spires or karst jungles. Its grandeur lies in its openness, its quiet invitation to listen, to breathe deeply, and to be dwarfed not by cliffs, but by the sky itself. This video is for educational or entertainment purposes only, and information provided in the video may be incorrect. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel and like the video.